into a political football. And regrettably, that wasn't the case. Elections inspire all sorts of responses, but we are back to square one in a sense, where we have to deal with the realities that are operational or that exist within the Eskom context. And let me encourage the board and the management to give you as much information as you can possibly absorb at this meeting, but on the understanding that on the one hand, there is a plan, but on the other hand, that's going to take time to put into operation. So, Chair, with a very broad overview, with your consent, can we request the Chair to come in and make his remarks, and then the management team can respond with greater specificity on some of the issues that you raised, both in respect of the financials, but also in relation to load shedding.
Thank you, Minister. Professor? Professor Mokgoba, the chair of the board. Is he still on the platform?
Seems to have dropped off, Chair.
Okay.
I'm not sure if any other board member would like to take over while the Prof tries to reconnect. Or can you call on the Prof to do so? I think it's coming back, Chair.
Okay. Professor, can you come in? Professor Mokgoba? His mic is on. I think he's having some connection problem. I will suggest any other board member.
I don't understand.
Talk to us, Professor.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, okay. I think my internet kept on telling me that the internet connectivity is poor. But let me take the opportunity to thank the honorable members and yourself, Chair, and the honorable Minister on this presentation that we are requested to provide, I think, to the Portfolio Committee. I just wanted to make a couple of points. I will not repeat what the Minister has said, although the line was a little bit broken, that as the board of Eskom, we believe that we do have a plan in order to deal with the challenges that as an organization we face on behalf of the country. And we are very much mindful of the role, I think, that Eskom has to play, I think, in the well-being of South Africans and in the economic development of our own country. We have identified maybe 3 issues. I think the Minister has touched on them. The first one is skills. The other one is really this reliability maintenance that we have to undertake. But the third one is what the Minister mentioned, that the culture at Eskom, I think, needs addressing, and it needs to change as we are unbundling Eskom at the moment. And that's something that we as the board have focused upon. Those are the 3 issues I want to put on the table. But we are determined, I think, like all South Africans, I think we are never happy and never pleased, I think, to see what we're seeing or to experience what we're experiencing. But together with the current management, I think we believe that we have a plan that requires time, that requires resources, and that requires all of us, I think, to be coordinated in what we do. For example, I know André has mentioned the fact that sometimes we make requests to National Treasury and it takes about 3 months or 2 months to get responses, and those delay some of the processes, but these are things that can be ironed as we go along. Now, just for to report and put matters on the record, I have been double booked today because I'm supposed to give my report as the Health Ombud to the Health Portfolio Committee, which started at 9, but I requested time that I participate in this Portfolio Committee on enterprises so that I can share my thoughts, I think, with Eskom up until 12 o'clock. And also I've been told that André is having a press conference and he should join us any minute now. But in the meantime, I think Mr. Caleb Kasim will be the conductor of the Eskom orchestra as we deliver, I think, what were required by the Portfolio Committee. I want to thank you. And if there are any issues, can they be raised before 12 o'clock so that I can depart and join the Health Portfolio Committee and give my report again to Parliament on what I do as the Health Ombud. Thank you, Chair, and I look forward to an interesting and an insightful meeting from the honorable members. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mkhoba. Eskom the person who will be doing the presentation, Mr. Kasim, can you come in?
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Honorable members. If we can just put up the presentation, Tasha, and I'll commence. Thank you. Thank you. You can move on in presentation mode. Tasha, we can move the slides. Thank you. Tasha, the slides are not moving. Apologies, Chair and members. Okay. Yeah. Next slide. Thank you. Morning, members. The last financial year ended March 21 was quite difficult. Obviously, as the Minister and all of us are aware, it was on the back of COVID-19 pandemic. This has resulted in a drop in sales volumes of 6.7%. And in terms of our financial results, we posted a net loss after tax of 18.9 billion. On the positive side, with the support from government, 56 billion received during that year, we were able to reduce our gross debt that was owing by 81.9 billion rand during the year. And as indicated by the Minister as well as the Chairman, and we're all well aware of the challenges that are facing us in the generation environment, the EAF being settled at just under 65% as at March 2021. On the network side, performance was much more positive and did improve year on year. Environmental challenges remain a concern, in particular with regard to the Kendall power stations and its emissions. Obviously, one of our key deliverables as Eskom is preparing the organization for the legal separation into transmission, distribution, and generation. As at the end of June 2021, we've completed the functional separation internally within the organization. If we move on, Natasha, thank you. Honorable Chair, you mentioned the importance of your site visits at Medupi. Yes, it is correct that we will manage to complete all the units, with Unit 1 coming into commercial operation on the 31st of July 2021. However, unfortunately, we are aware of the Unit 4 explosion that occurred in August last year. And that unit will take over 12 months to bring back onto the grid. Investigations are still undergoing with regard to Unit 4. On the positive side, there were no injuries or fatalities sustained. On Kusile, we were also able to bring in Unit 2 and Unit 3 during the financial year. I think it's important to appreciate that Medupi still requires flue gas desulfurization to be fitted, which is estimated to come at a cost of 38.4 billion rand, whilst Kusile is constructed with FTD already included. Chairperson and honorable members, we are addressing the defects at both these stations to get the performance more towards the design level activities. We move on to the next slide. Thank you. With regard to the COVID implications, we've seen that the peak was impacted anything between 7,500 megawatts to up to 11,000 megawatts, depending on the level of lockdown during the year. Obviously, it did impact on generation performance. We have managed to do some minimal maintenance during this period, but as indicated by the minister, we could not undertake long-term maintenance during this period due to implications in terms of securing necessary contractors as well as spares timeously. I think in terms of the numbers, from an Eskom perspective, in terms of how has COVID impacted on the staff, just under 7,000 cases during the financial year, split between Eskom employees and contractors, 6,140 recoveries. Sadly, COVID has resulted in 128 employees and 17 contractors succumbing to the pandemic. And as I've explained, that we have seen a reduction in terms of our sales volumes. If we move on to the next slide. From a strategy perspective, in terms of industry trends, I think the big one is obviously the decarbonization and moving towards greener technologies and addressing those challenges. Decentralization and that separation that we're currently undertaking. And then we need to make sure we make use of digitalization and the fourth industrial revolution to improve our processes, and which will also contribute to better controls going forward, not only from an operational perspective, but more importantly, we see great opportunities in our procurement and supply chain management environment. In terms of the just energy transition, as the older stations come towards the end of their lives, we would like to focus on repurposing and repowering them to ensure not only the megawatts that are required for the system and the country, but more importantly, to ensure those economies that surround these power stations continue from a country perspective. In terms of our financial outlook, obviously, we need to strengthen the balance sheet, improve our performance in terms of the income statement. And as our chairman has touched on, the importance of people and culture is a key focus. It's being monitored from executive management as well as board. Next slide, thank you. Yeah, that's just a breakdown of the executive team. I think we can skip this. Most of the positions have now been appointed. We just have an acting CPO. We have appointed our new head of legal as well recently. In terms of, on a high level, in terms of our financial performance, on the back of the reduced volume COVID, the overall revenue has increased here by 8.76%. That comes on the back of a tariff increase of 50%, obviously reduced by the volume reduction. We have received some favorable court judgments in terms of our reviews of recent NERSA decisions. Some have been implemented and some are still sitting with the courts and the court processes. From an Eskom perspective, we acknowledge that we need to be efficient and extract savings to minimize the impact on the consumers. We did achieve our target of 14.1 billion during the last financial year. Honorable members,
We've lost you.
We have lost the presenter.
Mr. Kasim.
On the day when I sacrificed the Chief Whip's chair for this meeting, we unfortunately have technical issues.
Honorable.
Is there anybody who can take us through while Mr. Kasim is experiencing some technical problems?
Chair, there must be something central because all of us are affected by these technical problems. You had one, I had one, Khalib is having one, the minister had one. So there must be something central that needs to be sorted out. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. We can just drop Honorable Kwankwa, because when he was not here, we never experienced these problems. I think
Chair, I was a fool napa when Manjegu Chief Whip Siamran.
Honorable Kwangwa, please save the day for us.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm here today for the entire meeting. Eskom is an issue for South Africa.
Okay.
Is there anybody who, I think we do have the CEO now. I saw the CEO here. If he has the presentation with him, but the presentation slide is there, he can continue.
Uh, Apologies, honorable members. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes,
we can
we
hear you
can.
now.
We can.
Yeah, let me proceed. Apologies for that, lost connectivity. Yeah, I think obviously from a cost savings, we've targeted 20 billion rand. And what we do find is that the pressure from the system comes through in higher usage of open cycle gas turbines, and that cost then affects our performance and our liquidity for the year. Year on year, the EBITDA has declined to 32.8 billion. We didn't make an operating profit, but that is then absorbed by your interest costs. From a balance sheet perspective, I've spoken about the debt. And what we've done, we've raised funding of 18.9 billion during the year. However, municipal debt, that trajectory and that growth remains a concern with an escalation year on year of 7.3 billion. Next slide. In terms of operational performance, yeah, I've touched on that a bit. I'm not going to repeat it. And the people and culture, if we can move on to the next slide. Business separation, honorable members, as we said, from an Eskom perspective, we work with the Intergovernmental Committee to meet the requirements of the legal separation of transmission by December 2021 and then generation and distribution by December 2022. There are challenges from a regulatory and a legal perspective. We are working with government to address that. For example, we are aware that there are amendments that are currently being undertaken in terms of the Electricity Regulation Act, which may impact then on timelines. Go on to the next slide. In terms of the generation performance, as we've said, that it remains a challenge. We can see that our load losses have resulted in 47 days of load shedding during the FY21 period, compared to 46 days in the previous financial year. I've touched on open cycle gas turbines with the total cost of 7 billion rand compared to 7.5 billion the previous year. In terms of the network performance, the system minutes lost has improved year on year, and we can see that even in terms of distribution, your SIFI interruption frequency index, as well as the SIDI duration index are positive and trending in the correct direction. However, there remains a challenge, especially on the distribution side, around asset vandalism, equipment theft, and overloading of the network, which does then increase the breakdowns and maintenance costs. And safety is a challenge that we work with on a daily basis. Next slide. Environmental performance, yeah, Kendall, Creole, Letabo, Matla, and Tatuka are all power stations that are not meeting their environmental requirements. We have done a lot of improvements in terms of Kendall, and it has been operating since December 2020 within emission limits. But you can see that our coal fleet emissions over the last 40 years have decreased. However, our water consumption has deteriorated marginally year on year. During the year we had 80 environmental legal contraventions compared to 59 of the previous year. with 68 related to water issues. We move on to the next slide. People and safety, our lost time injury rate has improved year on year. I've spoken about, we've had 8 contractor fatalities and 2 employees over the financial year. That is sad, and we strive to ensure that there are no fatalities to Eskom and contractors. In terms of our learner pipeline, we spend 2.8% of our employee benefits in terms of training activities. And in terms of our staff complement, you can see that that trend has decreased over the years, and year on year, there's been a 5.8% reduction. Well, that's to 2026, a 4.5% year on year. We ended the financial year with 42,749 staff. Overtime has reduced during the year, and we have introduced a production bonus for operating staff, which costs us 129 million, which is self-funded through the savings that I've spoken about earlier on. Thank you. Socioeconomic performance, electrification during the year was just under 107,000 connections. Our corporate social investment spend of 67.4 million, aiding in just under 803,000 beneficiaries during the year. And since inception of the build program, we've awarded contracts of 227 billion, of which local content was 169.5 billion rand. In terms of preferential procurement spend, that has reduced to 64.5%, slightly down from 2020 of just under 66%. If we can move on to the next slide. That's just breaking down our broad-based Black economic empowerment. Chair, I'm not going to read all the facts on the slide, but you can see that it's significant contributions in terms of the different categories between 2007 and 2021. Thank you. Financial performance. Without repeating myself, I think the importance is that liquidity and funding is a challenge, but it has been supported by the government support of the 56 billion. Obviously, our cash from operations during the year was negatively impacted with the pandemic. However, we managed to deal with our requirements in terms of operational and debt service commitments. Net interest bearing debt of 394 billion and our finance charges of 31.5 billion. It's up due to the higher borrowing costs and less interest being capitalized. I will touch on more detail in terms of the audit opinion. We had a qualified audit opinion relating to PFMA, in particular the completeness of irregular expenditure and the material uncertainty around our going concern based on our cash flow situation. However, we were able to conclude that Eskom remains a going concern on the back of the government support. Next slide. Financial performance, as one would expect, with the drop in our EBITDA and our EBITDA margin, the operating profit has dropped year on year from 9 billion in 2020 to 5.8 billion in 2021. And importantly, you can see that your cash interest cover, which should be targeted at an acceptable level of 2:1, is sitting at 0.85, down on the previous year, which means that Eskom is not generating enough cash to even pay for interest. And your debt service cover ratio, including your capital repayments, that ratio should be at least 1, which clearly shows that we can't meet our debt service commitments just from the cash from operations. The gross debt to EBITDA ratio is positive on the back of the equity support that has come through during the year, resulting in the gearing percentage dropping from 71 to 67. Next slide. Your income statement, you can go one back, apologies. Yeah, thanks, Natasha. I think primary energy, oh, you're going too fast. Yeah, thanks. Primary energy, I spoke about OCGTs. I think you can see that our employee benefits cost has decreased year on year. We're keeping that flat over the last few years. And then I think the important one is other expenses have grown by 29%. But if you normalize that for removing once-off transactions, that trend year on year is 1.6% increase. And the reason, one of the contributing factors to the higher other operating expenditure has been an increase in the decommissioning provision based on the change in discount rates. And we've also, during the year, written off Duva Unit 3, which resulted in an adjustment to the financials. Depreciation was flat year on year, and you can see that your finance costs remained around 31 billion, giving you your 18.9 billion bottom line loss compared to a 20.7 of the previous year. We did, during the financial year, recover 1.56 billion from ABB through voluntary disclosure of overpayments relating to Kusile, and I've spoken about decommissioning. Year on year, we've seen that positive exchange rate has resulted in benefits in the balance sheet movement, as well as impacts in terms of other financial instruments and embedded derivatives. Move on to the next slide. I'm not going to go into detail here, but that's just showing you the drop and the different categories were all affected by the pandemic. And importantly, that in terms of revenue that we cannot recognize because of our ability to collect from consumers, 6.1 billion in 2021, similar to the previous year of 6.1 billion rand. Next slide. On the primary energy, all I want to highlight here, over and above the OCGTs, we can see that the IPP costs have increased year on year on the back of more volume. Total IPPs at 30.8 billion compared to 28 billion of the previous year. In terms of a rand per megawatt, our cost change, that's reduced by 3%. And with an improvement in terms of Brent crude and diesel price coming down year on year, we see that rand per megawatt on diesel has decreased. Overall, our coal costs have increased by 6% year on year. And this is the first time in many years that Eskom's coal escalation is single digit, whereas normally it trended closer to 15% in recent years. And then the overall impact on primary energy has been an increase from 112 billion in 2020 to just under 116 billion rand in 2021. Next slide. From a financial position perspective, what you see that with us only raising just under 18 billion, under 19 billion of funding during the year, our liquidity position has dropped. However, on the positive side, as you can see, your debt and securities dropped from 483 billion to 401 billion. And we aim to continue. Gross finance charges is 45 billion rand, and then after you take out your capitalized finance costs, you're left with the 31 billion, and you'll see that Eskom's average cost of debt is just under 10%, and the returns we earn on our cash balances are sitting at 3.8% on average. And during the year, you can see that how we were able to reduce the debt securities with a repayment of 65 billion, positive exchange rate movements of 35 billion, and then we raised debt of 16 billion net of commercial paper, leaving us with a closing balance of 401.8 billion rand. Next slide, please. Funding, we were able to secure 18.9 billion during the financial year. I think what is important here is on the bottom graph, our debt maturity profile over the next 5 years reflects on average around 60 billion going forward. And importantly, in FY22, there's 71 billion rand that needs to be repaid. And from a government guarantee utilization perspective, as at the end of July, we had 47 billion rand remaining, obviously subject to each transaction being approved by National Treasury. Thank you. From a cash flow perspective, effectively, honorable members, what we're saying, without the government support that we receive, Eskom would have not been able to meet its debt service commitments. And effectively, that gap of 75 billion was covered with the government support of the 56 billion rand. Can move on. In terms of our municipal debt, as I've indicated, debt trend remains a concern. We are working with government to address these issues through the political task team and the multidisciplinary revenue committee. And what we do see that the top 20 defaulting municipalities contribute the majority in terms of that arrear debt. We've got 43 active payment agreements in place, with only 10 that were fully honored as at the end of March 2021, which includes 12 of the top 20, of which 2 have only been fully honored. In terms of Soweto, That has dropped from the previous year from 12.8 billion to 7.5 billion due to a write-off that we put through during the financial year in terms of induplum interest. And in terms of other arrear debts that are outstanding, there are only 2 large customers with a combined debt of 700 million that's owing to Eskom. Next slide. Capital expenditure, as our build program has come progressing towards the end, especially from Medupi and Kusile, we can see the trend where capital expenditure peaked at 2017 at 60 billion. In the last 2 financial years, it's remained relatively flat at about 24 billion, also taking into account what Eskom can afford and balancing liquidity with requirements. And as indicated that Medupi, we still need to incur the FGD costs. Move on. In terms of the outlook for March 22, we do see an improvement in our performance. One with our EBITDA improving, and this was based on the budget of March 22, from just under 33 billion rand to 45 billion. This results in then your operating profit growing to just under 14 billion based on the budget, and that positive trend then filters through into your debt service cover ratios, including cash interest cover. Government support for this financial year, FY22, 31.7 billion rand has already been received. And in terms of commitments from government, there's 21.9 billion for FY23 and 21 billion for FY24. Can we move on to the next slide? In terms of the audit qualification, I think in particular the PFMA, the disclosure around irregular expenditure and not being able to complete, in particular the opening balance correctness due to many transactions going back several years. And we need to improve in terms of our procurement and contract management, as well as consequence management. In terms of the corrected material misstatement in the audit opinion relating to inventory, I've got a slide on that that I'll talk to, as well as revenue management collection. Next slide. In irregular expenditure, thank you, Natasha. What you will see there is that this graph shows that if I look at the blue block, in terms of your opening balance, 36.3 billion rand. Prior year cleanup, which continues, that added 9.5 billion rand relating to pre-21 transactions. New transactions during the last financial year added 2.2 billion rand, and their breakdown of that is reflected with half of it linked to fuel oil purchases that were deemed not an emergency of 1.2 billion rand in total, and then the other ones being non-compliance in terms of tender process, 380 million, and not in accordance with NT instructions, 260 million. What we have done, honorable members, we now have a loss control department that has been established and capacitated from April 21. So all transactions now go through them for vetting, as well as to assess the appropriateness and what we're doing in terms of irregular expenditure, and then to get condemnations either internally or importantly externally with National Treasury. Currently, we have received condemnations of 296 transactions valued at 9.6 billion rand from National Treasury. So that has been a positive step during this last financial year. Next slide. Just to add one or two points in terms of what we're doing on, go back please, on irregular expenditure. We've updated our internal policy to align with the legislative prescripts. We have got now a central coordination register that deals with condemnations that goes to National Treasury. And we are working with TPE and National Treasury, importantly, to try to ring fence the historic irregular expenditure to ensure that the opening balance issues that we've had that affects your qualification can be resolved, and then we focus on current activities. And from a supplier perspective, Eskom has a supplier review committee that has been re-established. We've concluded on 63 matters of the 253 issues that have been recommended by our Assurance and Forensic Department to review and investigate. Next slide. Chairperson, in terms of revenue management, I think all we are highlighting here is that, this is the inventory one. When we do submit in terms of the requirements, draft financials by the 31st of May to National Treasury, Eskom did indicate in the draft submission that we were still working with the auditors around our inventory balances sitting in our balance sheet. And we were only able to conclude that post May 31st. And that was the opinion that is included in the auditor's report. We have decided, obviously, this remains a key area in terms of working capital management, and we're looking to then automate that in terms of barcoding, RFIDs, and doing more regular inventory counts at our respective warehouses to ensure that we don't repeat this non-compliance issue, and more importantly, which resulted in a write-off of 1.2 billion in the last financial year. Next slide. Chairperson, in terms of revenue management, Eskom disagreed with the auditor's conclusion that Eskom is not in control of its revenue management. I think if you look at our overall payment rates, it's increased year on year, and we are doing a lot to address that recoveries. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. If we just go to the next slide. Chairperson, this shows that in terms of our total overdue debt with regard to the respective different customer segments, and you can see that a number of activities are taken by Eskom to ensure that we do recover what is due to us. Where you find percentages over 100%, it means that we are also collecting arrear payments that become due. If you just go on to the next slide, Natasha. Chairperson, if I just focus on the bottom table, It just shows the approach we take in terms of our debt and credit management. On average, for FY21, 63,000 reminders are sent per month to customers in terms of a first call, and in a second call, 40,000 calls per month. Disconnection requests, 25,000 disconnection requests every month. In terms of customers disconnected in the financial year of 2021, 57,000, and payment arrangements, 1,667. So we do believe as Eskom, we are doing a lot, and you can see that reflected in your payment rates. Thank you.
Thank you. You done?
Yeah, Chair, this is just the conclusion. We do see a positive outlook for this financial year. I'm done, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Member.
Okay, thank you so much. Is the CEO want to say something before I open for questions?
Good morning, Honourable Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Apologies for joining late. I'm sure that my colleagues and board members explained the circumstances, so apologies again. I've got nothing further to add. I think our CFO did a fine job of explaining the financial results. Thank you.
Thank you. That is it, honourable members. Now is the time for you to engage the report. I'm having a list of you with me, and I will like all of you to shoot as much as you can. I want to start with Honourable Mkhwanazi. Honourable Mkhwanazi, can you start?
Thanks, Honourable Chairperson. Greetings to honourable members, Minister, the board chairperson, the Eskom board chairperson, and the management. Chairperson, let me start by thanking you and the committee for allowing this meeting to take place before its scheduled a program, because we are really facing a problem as the country, and the issue of Eskom. Really, the experience that we have experienced in the last few weeks, it was very inconveniencing, and especially to the thousands of matriculants that are writing their first matric exams. It was really not a nice experience in the new democratic South Africa that we are experiencing, including my 18-year-old Audit as my son. Chairperson, also the effect and the impact of the load shedding to businesses, especially the SMMEs, and to individuals. Really, it's not. It's really not a nice experience to experience. Chairperson, say in all said and done, we really need to welcome the report as presented by the management of Eskom. But Chair, firstly for me, I would like for the management of Eskom to go to their audit outcome opinion. If they can share with the committee on the work or action done to address the 2019-20 irregular expenditure and their plan to address the 2020-21 irregular expenditure. Why I'm emphasizing on that, Chair, as much as they reported on their plan, my worry is it is increasing, and I don't see what they've presented resulting of any fruit or any progress going forward. If they can't talk to that and their plan going forward. Secondly, Chair, in all the options presented, especially some were highlighted by the minister, in his remarks. Is there any plan to reduce the 3 to 4 year maintenance period that they've cited in their report and in the CEO's press conference? They must report on their eradication of backlogs in maintenance, especially because we've just received today, Chair, in the news that there is a plan to stage 2 load shedding, of which it is very inconveniencing. I think as this committee, we need to be taken through and to understand the problem, the problems behind it, and also to understand the challenges, and also to understand the plan going forward. Thirdly, Chair, for me, for the recent load shedding and the current that is happening and the plan going forward, can the Eskom management share with us the lesson learned, especially on the communication strategy? Because for me, sitting here as an individual and also as a public representative, I think the communication it's a bit lacking to all the stakeholders and to all the individuals and to all the end users, to say what is the role of each and every stakeholder to work with Eskom and also to assist Eskom in the problem of load shedding, and also the communication that is expected from Eskom, if they can share their strategy, so that maybe us as a committee, we can be indicated by them to say what is it that we can assist to going forward. Fourthly, Chair, 50 for me, as you have indicated, when we attended the oversight, we're a bit comfortable from the information that we're getting, but after we've experienced the load shedding, we're also a bit confused about that information that we got there. But if they can relate on the readiness of the power stations that we have oversight vis-a-vis the load shedding that we're experiencing. But on top of that, can we get the update on the investigation on Medupi power station explosion, but also on the flats that we have talked about, Chair, on your remarks, the Kusile Ambate flats that we visited during the oversight. Lastly, Chair, for me, is to the board chairperson and the board members. One of the responsibilities of the board of directors is the strategic direction and the monitoring to the company. If the board chairperson can share with me or us with the committee your strategic plan you have to address the additional capacity that is needed of electricity to meet the demands, to meet the current demands, but also share with us your monitoring plan as the board towards the company for the Eskom to do things right, and for example, the staff performance, the quality of coal supplied to contract to different plants, and the performance of contractors. Some of that was highlighted by the minister in his remarks, to make and their plan as the board to make sure that at the end of the day, Eskom provides a reliable, affordable electricity to all South Africans. For now, Chair, thank you. That will be my take. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Kwanazi. Now, can we go to Honorable Kachalia?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. It made for very interesting reading, and a number of questions that I have generated come out of it. A number of these questions can be answered immediately, but in the event of some of these questions requiring data that is not to hand, can we please ensure that those are answered in writing afterwards, please? I will send the full list of the questions onto the Secretary of the Committee for on-sending. Firstly, What is the cost that Eskom buys diesel from suppliers? Not the unit cost averaged, but specifically per supplier, and how much diesel is required to meet peak demand and shortfalls for the coming year. 2, can we have a realistic appraisal of as to how reliable and sustainable the repairs that have been affected are? What downtime is envisaged for ongoing maintenance to secure reliability? Thirdly, please explain to what extent municipalities are not implementing load shedding, who, why, and what is being done about it. With regard to headcount, can we have a breakdown of the people in the executive band by job description, salary, and relevant qualifications? Then, what will it take in terms of time and cost going forward to ensure the reliability of Medupi and Kusile? Then, in terms of the proposed sale of older plants, what criteria is required from prospective buyers to ensure the continued generation at requisite levels, and what steps are being taken to mitigate the inevitable shortfalls as these are being refurbished? Further, since the inception of the new bill program, the local content of contracts have amounted to 169.5 billion rands. Can we have a schedule of the spend? Who, at what cost, and at what rationale? Additionally, in the future absence of further government equity contributions, can we have sight of plans to reduce debt and support liquidity? Now, I have a number of questions that refer to slide 15 about the data, rationale, impact on debt, reliability, cost effectiveness, and the like. So A, why do we have different time horizons for spend reflected over the period 2017 to 21 and contract values reflected from 07 to 21? Can we have more comparable numbers, please? B, what do you mean by total measurable spend? Surely all spend is measurable. C, what is the difference between local content, contracted, and local content spend? As the latter is higher than the former, does this mean that we received local content at zero cost? D, we spend 70 billion rands to create 190,000 jobs. One job, that is, for 1 million spent. Are these durable jobs? Do they stay in business after the work is done for us? Is this high or low efficiency for job creation versus other methods of job creation? E, we create, it says, 11,400 skills. Really? So there are more than 10,000 skills we are seeking to develop. What are these skills? What is being counted here? And what are we saying? F, do we have a measure on what would have been saved if we bought all 498 billion from non-BEE compliant suppliers? Also, 235 billion is spent on non-BEE suppliers. Does this mean that if there were no BEE offerings for these supplies, or were these supplies much better? Let me start that again. 235 billion is spent on non-BEE suppliers. Does this mean that there were no BEE offerings for these supplies, or were these suppliers much better or offering better value than non-BEE suppliers? H, this is a 1/3 total of the spend over the previous 5 years for comparison. What is that ratio? We need a timeline comparison to provide meaning. Then, can we have a breakdown of the other 2/3 BEE spend in terms of cost, comparative value, durable and sustainable jobs created? And finally, do we have a reference point, given the need for prudence and the imperative to keep the lights on, of how much additional spend has been incurred to ensure that this BEE spend is indeed BEE compliant? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kashalia. Honorable Maotwe. Honorable Maotwe.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I'm going to focus more on the financial aspect of the presentation. That's what the meeting asked for. So the first one is, what is the comment from the minister with regards to the audit opinion that Eskom has had 5 years consecutively? Eskom has been receiving a qualified opinion for 5 years now. So what opinion, what is his comment on that? And then on the issue of material uncertainty, the auditors are clear that Eskom incurred losses of about 18.9 million. And then the current liabilities exceed the assets by over 19 million. Now, that is an area of concern for me, and I would want to hear from the CFO, what measures do you have in place to better the situation that we find ourselves in? And then in terms of compliance with the legislation, the auditors are saying your audit statements, the financial statements that you submitted were not prepared in accordance with the prescribed financial reporting framework. Why is that the situation? What led to this non-compliance with the legislation? And then in terms of expenditure also, they're saying the effective and appropriate steps were not taken to prevent irregular and filtered expenditure. So, and this was the case even in the last financial year. So it looks like there's no measures that are put in place to make sure that these things, they don't recur. And there's also irregularities that are mentioned by the auditors as an area of concern when it comes to procurement and contract management. So CFO, CPO, what steps are you taking to ensure that we all reach the compliance that we need? And then the last issue for me, Chair, is an update on this irregular and wasteful expenditure that has been incurred by Eskom year and year on. What is the consequence management? Who is being held accountable for this irregular and wasteful expenditure? Because it can't be that it keeps being reported and nothing is happening about it. So what is the board actually doing to make sure that the management then carry out the consequence management that is expected to be taken? And then finally, the issue of load shedding. I mean, no one can shy away from that issue. And I didn't even hear any commitment from the minister when you were speaking earlier on. This is now the third year of this administration. We're still having load shedding. What is the plan? And when are we going to have this issue resolved once and for all? Because we can't keep on saying there's going to be more time needed. We don't have time. Industries are failing. Small companies are closing down. Businesses are collapsing because of load shedding. So you are crippling the already burdened economy that we have in the country. You're not assisting the economy to grow. So what is Eskom doing about load shedding? When are we going to have load shedding as a history in this country? Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Mawat. Can we go to Honorable Buthelezi?
Hey.
Honorable Buthelezi? Is Honorable Buthelezi there?
Not present.
Not present, okay. Let's go to Honorable Kumed.
Chair, can I be given an opportunity to respond, as I'm going to leave the meeting very soon, to the questions that are addressed to me as chair of the board?
Okay.
Chair Chabalala here. Sorry to interject. I noted Mr. Makova, Professor did say that he needs to be out at 12, but I'm not saying you must not prevent him from responding. If I can be noted after Gumede, I'll really appreciate. My network is not really good, but I want to contribute such that he also notes what one has to say. Thank you.
I'm fine.
Okay, I've noted that. I will ask Honorable Gumede, and then Kwankwa, and then you come, Honorable Shabalala, and then we give it to the professor.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Honorable Kumede.
Chair, thank you very much. Performance of Eskom. Yes, there are slight improvements, but one will say they are very, very much insignificant in a sense, because their performance has kind of been fluctuating. But Chair, I'll be interested. You can't have a loss of 18.9 billion. That's too high for a loss of that much. Perhaps we need to be at least a word that says we suspect this and that happened, which could have led to a loss of that much. You know, I'm looking and I'm listening at the presentation. When we talk to Eskom, we talk billions. We don't even talk millions. So if you talk millions, that is very little, perhaps in a sense. One again appreciate the statistics on fraud and corruption. But it's interested as well to know that what action has been taken, and we may as well wish to know what update we may really have. The minister has spoken about the contractors and the poor performance. Chair, you know, I'm not sure whether people that would have done a shabby work will still be paid. That what in fact Eskom, what action does Eskom take in order to challenge, because it looks as if this work is not guaranteed. Because if it's the work that's guaranteed, perhaps the whoever will respond to this will have to guide us that is it a work guaranteed or it's a work, especially if it is done internally or externally, which is a matter of procurement as well. So I think we need all that guidance that in fact what's happening with the poor performance, is the work guaranteed? Those contractors that would have done the work, do they get recalled and fix the work that they would have done? He spoke as well about Kusile and Medupi. Chair, you know, this one is, I'm interested to know what lessons has perhaps the entity learned out of the occurrences in both these areas. I'll be more tempted to ask a question, whether was it necessary that the artisan housing project be undertaken? We had a loss of 1.1 billion. We started, in fact, at 260. It was yes, it started at 260 million this time, but it ended up being a 1.1 billion. We don't hear anything. Those units are still kind of incomplete in a sense. Chair, when one reads, you find that there are members that in fact resigned more or less a similar period. I'm asking this that it's because it could have affected the performance. We don't get the reasons why perhaps those two members resigned, and we understand that the entity, in fact, the board has requested that those two positions be filled, right? But I'm not sure whether they've been given a permission to do that or not. But in a true sense, if we may be given an update on such an aspect. The presenter Kasim gave us, I like this one of a local content because it tells us that the community does benefit in a sense. He as well mentioned the debt with municipality. Chair, you know, there is something that you have always been raising. Whenever we present the debt, we always reflect the municipalities. I'll be interested as well to know what strategy, the collection strategy, Eskom has, but not only focusing on municipality. Talk as well the big businesses, because we understand that quite a lot big businesses are owing to Eskom. The other one, Chair, is if the minister is still around or anyone, if the DG is present, I would like to be educated on the blackout and load shedding. Are those concepts similar, interchangeable? How do they differ? If anyone could just give an explanation. Chair, a pertinent question here is, if you look at the presentation, will Eskom ever be normal again? How long will that take to normalize Eskom, in the sense that, you know, what strategy as we go forward to say, yes, Eskom will be normal at such a period and it will take us this much? We're aware when we look at it, everyone is questioning that the the debt is always increasing. I think I've spoken about the collection strategy that we want. When we introduce as well, because this one is much more interesting, when we introduce the decarbonization, what will be the status of the labor within Eskom? Otherwise, Chair, let me wait there. I think I have exhausted some of the questions that I wanted to ask. Apart from, I have not spoken about what Professor contributed in terms of skills, reliability, maintenance, and culture in Eskom. I think it will be much more important because you will find that when Eskom started using some of the interventions, quite a number of misconducts were manifested. That's the one we are saying that may we be reported what strategies they have. Can we get a report so that we are sure that at least going forward, some of those people who belong to the estate capture period must at least be dealt with, so that we are sure that they are in fact end up behind bars. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for your opportunity.
Thank you, Honorable Kumede. Honorable Kwangwa.
Thank you, Chair. When you called everyone honorable and except me, I thought I'd lost office somehow. Or you were trying to tell me that I'm about to lose office. Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity. I think from where I'm sitting is that if you were to look at the strategic turnaround plan, which was approved by the board in November 2018, it has key focus areas: operations recovery, improving the income statement, strengthening the balance sheet, driving business operations, and transforming our people and culture. I had the minister making this point or underscoring this point because I had the minister, I think, and the chairperson of the board, highlighting especially, I think, point number 5, transforming our people and culture. It concerns me a great deal that it seems like more than 3 years after the plan was adopted, that this critical aspect has not been addressed or attended to properly, or that progress is slow in trying to transform the culture of the entity in the entity Eskom. That obviously you have to marry it with the 9-point plan, which was also adopted at the same time and unveiled and announced at the same time. I think when Eskom reports to us, maybe the format, I understand now we're dealing with annual financial statements, is to always go back to the 9-point plan and give us progress with each and every one of those aspects in detail, so that we're able to keep track of the progress that is being made on a quarterly basis or annual basis on the points that they actually committed to themselves. The other aspect, Chair, which I think is important for us to consider, is the fact that when it comes to the majority of KPIs, most of them have not been achieved, such as to improve plant operations, reduce environmental footprint, but also issues that have to do with industrialization and localization. And the problem, obviously, with that is that then if targets that I set are not achieved, then it affects the overall performance of the business or Eskom as a business in its totality. I would like to Eskom to take us into their confidence about the defects correction plan at Medupi rather than Kusile, and whether or not they are keeping track on those defects to make sure that whatever deadlines we have set for ourselves, meaning Eskom has set for itself, are met, so that we don't sit here, say, hypothetically speaking, in 2023, we say that there needs to be extension to those deadlines for some other reasons. I think South Africans need to know when there are challenges. And that communication, which one of the honorable members spoke about earlier, public communications about challenges facing Eskom and being transparent about those problems is critical so that people know exactly what is happening at Eskom. I want to, before I move to other points, to move quickly to the question about revenue, gross revenue, which stands at about 204. I don't hear, for an example, Chair, I think if you are talking about 106,000 new connections per annum, say you are citing them as connections that took place over a certain period, should Eskom not do a focus to say, for instance, on average, how much money do we expect to receive from the connections? Obviously, the connections would happen in different areas. You know, the people that fall into different categories in terms of LSMs. Surely, if you have a lot of connections that are taking place in indigenous communities, you should know on average how much you should expect to get out of those connections, because then it gives you an indication of by how much your revenue is going to grow when you have connections. Because I know for a fact, I was sitting with a number of people during the campaign period in the Eastern Cape, who told me about certain villages where connections were done, but the prepaid meters were never connected. There was no delivery of prepaid meters. In fact, in some of the communities, they even said, it seems like Eskom has run out of prepaid meters. It's a missed opportunity, it's lost revenue. You don't need an audit report. The audit report highlights the revenue management, which is revenue collection, but you don't need an audit report to understand that by just taking a casual look at the financial statements, if you are going to only depend on tariff increases in order for your revenue to grow, it means there's something wrong with the collection that's not happening properly. But you're saying you have a problem with the revenue, which is growing at 2.4%, which has grown rather 2.4% per annum. I accept that you are growing from a high base, but if you are keeping track of revenue management while dealing with tariff issues and not only depend on tariff increases to improve revenue, the situation might improve. I expected a focus of some kind to say out of the 106,000, this is the impact that's going to have on the overall gross revenue of the company and so on, a breakdown. Maybe it's a discussion that you can have among yourselves. The other issue for me is when you talk about the gross securities and borrowings having decreased, yes, I accept to 441 billion due to government support. But also we need to get an indication of how you intend to stabilize debt or how you intend to reduce your debt levels over the next couple of years. So you can use the medium term as an example. But it's important that we are taken into your confidence with respect to matters that have to do with your debt outlook. That's of critical importance. Let's go back to the other issue where you talk about municipal debt. I think when it comes to municipal debt in particular, the key issue, I think it is the interventions of government that have failed so far. And perhaps the minister should account for that. I don't think Eskom will only answer in terms of its frustrations, its interventions that it has put in place. But I think it's more the government that must account to say the failure to collect the municipal debt. How are we going to deal with this issue? How are we going to address it? What happened in the past and what is going to happen in future to ensure that these challenges do not occur or recur again? Because it needs to be addressed at a policy level. One of the issues that I think are also very important is to say, how will Eskom ensure that the transmission and distribution networks are sufficiently maintained in order not to compromise the grid over the next couple of years? It concerns me a great deal that when I look at the challenges that are facing Eskom currently, there are challenges that were foreseen and known in 2018 when you adopted the turnaround plan. But we seem to be going back to the same challenges, or we seem to be stuck in a situation where, while we know the challenges, while we have written the problem statement eloquently, we don't seem to be able to get ourselves and the country out of this quagmire. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Kwangwa, before we give Professor Honorable Chabalala, please.
All right, thank you so much, Chairperson. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm also trying to race against the 12 o'clock of the professor. Look, let me greet members of parliament, including the board and also the minister. The question I have is that what is the basis upon which the energy availability factor is falling over a few years from 69% to 64%. One would have thought that with the maintenance that occurred during the early period of lockdown, that will improve. But ordinarily, this is, I'm basing the question based on the low EAF restrictions, supply negativity impacts on revenue. Secondly, why is Eskom not developing a division which is solely focused on renewable energy? And I want to base this question based on the fact that, look, our involvement in the renewable sector means that we'll know the regularity hurdles in the renewable sector. But of course, there's lots of discussion around the energy security in the country. And Minister would have alluded to this, to say we need to have a better energy discussion in the country so that we have one understanding exactly where we're taking the issue of energy. Thirdly, Chair, what is Eskom plan to reduce this load shedding, which is damaging the economy? We know it damages small business or even big businesses. The livelihoods, people's lives depend on this. But what is the plan going forward in the future? How will the unbundling of Eskom into 3 divisions really balance the need to secure Eskom financial position? We've spoken about this plan, we adopted this plan, and I think it's important that at a particular point, we need to try to focus on the issue of unbundling so that we're able to deal as a committee, but also as a society and move with Eskom around the issue of this unbundling, because we seem to really deviate from it. And reality is that there's supposed to be the legal a prescript around it by December or so. So I want to find out what is really the balance that we need to do. The migration of customers to alternatives to Eskom for electricity supply, it will definitely lead to a decline in revenue. And this means that Eskom will not be able to regain that customer base. So how does Eskom envisage to optimize its revenue? Has a transfer pricing mechanism for electricity between these 3 divisions been determined? And will this further increase the electricity tariffs with what the NERSA has just spoken to? What is the company's strategy to increase its revenue and to reduce this debt liability? I think there's a question that bothers everybody at this point. And lastly, not only lastly, second last, the base load of electricity supplied in the country, it will have to be supplied by Eskom. And the base load for satisfying local demand will definitely grow. And this is one move that I think that we should be all supporting. Now, Chair, as the committee, I think we need to come with solutions as well to this quagmire we find ourselves. Auditor General Minister would have advised us, one, that something that came out, and it was a concern from our side, that Eskom over time has been audited by a private sector throughout. And we would have asked the question, why is it that Eskom is not audited by the AG South Africa, so that one minimizes the issue of the cost? And why I'm raising this is because part of the time and the issues that the auditors of this private sector, they give financial statements late, and this is what the AG would have raised. Now, I want to ask from ourselves, Minister, do you think we would have appetite to ensure that we move Eskom from being audited by private companies, considering the magnitude and the importance of Eskom as a public sector, necessarily because they receive the budget from the public? I think it's really important that we should be able to minimize that. So I want to ask about it, that do we have that type of appetite where we can really give the auditing to the Auditor General of South Africa? Minister, the issue of Soweto debt, I feel that Eskom is very simplistic in approach around it. Before, the former mayor of Johannesburg, may his soul rest in peace, both of them, Jeff Makuba and Joliti Matongo, there was a talk around MOU that needs to be signed to give over the power supply, if not for City Power, to be able to supply energy to its own residents. How far are we with that? And what has been the pros and cons that would have learned? But what is the way forward around it? Communities of Soweto, it is not a secret that they do want to pay for electricity, and we've encouraged our communities, they need to change the culture of not paying for services. So they need to pay for services. But with this load shedding, they would have realized to say, indeed, the issue of meter boxes is very important. There are parts that we've seen that they've welcomed that, besides what has been happening historically. What is the plan for us to make sure that we speed that type of a situation where indeed we are putting meters so that people pay for what they consume? And I think the culture of payment is important, and we should encourage South Africans that those who can pay, they need to pay for services. It is something that we need to, but I think that when it comes to Soweto, we need to handle it better. But also want to couple it with the issue of big businesses. Every time we're told about municipality debt, we're told, if not Soweto, it's owed so much. Where are these big businesses that are owed? We might sugarcoat it and say they don't owe so much, but let us be specific to those as well that are big companies that are not paying to Eskom, and Eskom is not able to really get what is due to them. My last comment now on the issue, Chairperson, around the CEO. And I'm asking Mr. Makgoba, you know, the matter of corruption and the state capture that we've seen, that is in Zondo, it happened and it's historical now. Now we're in the 6th administration. However, we're seeing lots of matters that are still coming up where certain officials are still within the employ of Eskom. What are we doing to ensure that our disciplinary committee within the board does its work? Because the question becomes, and when we interacted with the AG South Africa, is that when do you as a board come in, especially when the rot keeps on happening? It would have reported that there is some company, because of irregular expenditure, that is being paid over 100 million more. There is an investigation. Now, Eskom must investigate itself for procuring or tender irregularities, whatever that situation is. For me, it looks like there isn't somebody who's holding somebody accountable. And I think this procurement processes within Eskom, you need as a board to come closer to it. And I think it's something that you're not doing very well. I might be wrong, Professor, and hence I'm raising it with you here to say, what is it that as a board, at what point you come in when it comes to these inefficiencies that we see and corruption that we see of these big companies, if not companies procured to do services and they don't provide services on time, they overlap or they overcharge the state. But we as the board, at what point do we come in? Mr. Ruyter, this goes to you, sir. You know, your interview around what Eskom and what you think and your views, I really think it was unfortunate. And I want to implore you, sir, to say that, you know, for you to respond to say Eskom, call it Eskom is a dead horse and you're a hockey or something of that nature, it's really disturbing, because some of us as MPs who are really need to hold you accountable, now we must be asked these questions to respond. What did you mean? Perhaps it might be important, and I want to implore you personally and ask Mr. Makgoba as well as the board, that to ensure that there are statements that as much as we are public servants, or rather civil servants, there are things that we should say in the media, there are things that perhaps they might be taken out of proportion or in context. At this point, I think on that statement, it's upon yourself to really correct it and also apologize to South Africans. We can't say that when we've given you the responsibility, if not the department given you the responsibility and trusted you with this responsibility. But for you to say Eskom is a dead horse, what does it mean? It then means to us when we interpret it, and for us to be able to speak to communities, it's about you don't have faith in where the direction of Eskom while we're dealing with the 3 unbundling stages. So, and you are charged, you are at the center of this. So I think it's something that you need to consider. An apology should be made publicly. If not, you need to really state your statement in context. At this point, it's really, it was really unfortunate, and that's something I needed to express. Thank you so much, Chairperson, for the opportunity.
Okay, let's just consider the Prof, because he's gonna be leaving soon. Can you, Prof, take those issues that are you feel that they need to be responded to by yourself, and then we'll go back to other members.
Yes, Chair. Can you just close the door? Can members hear me?
Yes, you are loud and
Can
clear, Prof.
Okay. Let me, first of all, I think, thank all the members that have contributed, I think, to this discussion so far. And I want to start with Honorable Member Shabalala on the number of issues that she has raised, but I will just be very brief. The energy availability factor that has reduced from 69 to 64. And what is the rationale behind that? Clearly, I think as the plant is deteriorating and getting dysfunctional, the energy availability factor of the output of those plants will deteriorate over time. And this is a function of really the degeneration that has occurred, I think, within the system rather than any particular importance. The second point I think that she raised relates to load shedding, because I think the energy availability factor is something that relates to load shedding. But more importantly, it is about accountability and the rot of corruption. Let me just simply say that a number of investigations has taken place at Eskom. A number of disciplinary cases have taken place at Eskom, and consequence management has been implemented. I think that information can be easily provided, I think, to this committee. But more importantly, there are a number of cases that have now joined the legal system of the country, and we have no control over that. For example, we have had the Econ Oil matter. We have had all the state capture issues that are now within the legal system in relation to the Guptas and so forth. And these are not within our purview and our control, but I want to assure the committee that consequence management, investigations of corruption have actually come to a standstill or has reduced significantly at Eskom, I think, as a result of this board and this management that we are talking about. But maybe it would be useful to present to this committee, maybe in writing, a summary of such actions and activity that relates to the, I think, to stopping the rot of corruption that has taken place before. Now, I want to go to the first honorable member. I think it was Mkwanazi, who wanted to know the strategy of Eskom, and it also deals with the load shedding matter. There are two strategies. I'm going to summarize. The long-term strategy of Eskom deals with the Eskom Just Energy Transition Strategy, which deals with really social impacts, job creation, but also deals with policy alignment and cooperation agreements between various sectors, like, for example, public enterprise, minerals and energy, Barbara Creasy's department, National Treasury. All of these role players are important in the overall long strategy of Eskom. And then the last two factors of the Just Energy deals with cleaner energy, decarbonization, and obviously funding sources that would allow us. That's the long-term strategy of Eskom. Now, the one that you are asking about, Honorable Konazi, is what I'm going to spend time with because it deals with load shedding. First of all, when André Ruyter was appointed on the 6th of January 2020, and I was appointed on the 10th of January 2020, we had a board meeting with André on the 16th of January 2020. And the question that he was asked was, what is your plan and what is your interpretation of what needs to be done at Eskom? And I just want to list those things and capture them, and then I'll tell you what the progress has been. The first was unbundling. The second was to reorganize the executive. The third was to deal with reliability maintenance. And the third was to deal with cost savings. The fifth was to deal with governance problems that had plagued Eskom and particularly the culture and the corruption that had been taking place. Now, this was the short-term or the immediate plan that André saw in his vision of interpreting what we needed to do. So what has happened during this period? At every board meeting or in between board meetings, we have received reports of progress from André and his executive on each of these elements or some of this element. Reliability maintenance, which is really the bedrock of trying to deal with load shedding, obviously was discussed in that board meeting of the 16th of January, but it only kick-started towards the end of the middle of this year for obvious reasons that we required money. You require a 2-year planning period, and we have about 80 units that we have to repair. And so far we have repaired 7 out of 80 units that require reparation because they are dysfunctional. And every 3 months or so, as the chair of the board, I meet with the generation team of Eskom to try and understand their problems and to try and discuss ways of trying to reduce load shedding. And as I say, we require about 11 billion, and so far we've been able to provide about maybe 6 or so billion for maintenance, reliability maintenance. We also, I think, as the board have discovered that there are skills shortages, particularly at the power plant, in order to monitor what happens there. And some of the board members have taken the trouble to visit the board to see with their own eyes what the problems are, just like I think the committee obviously took a visit to some of the plant. So there are all these issues that have also been interrupted by obviously COVID. So it's not that the board is not seized with the idea of load shedding, and the board and the executive management of Eskom are all seized with this problem. And just to respond to one of the committee members, we all want to reduce load shedding and bring it to an end. It is not an impossible task, but we are faced, as I say, with a plant that has been deteriorating over the past 15 years. So that's the challenge that we are facing, and how we repair and restore this plant requires, I think, a detailed plan in which all the role players are coordinated and are in sync. As somebody has mentioned, about 2 or 3 years ago, Eskom made it clear that we require additional, megawatt capacity of between 4,000 to 6,000. It is 3 years that call was made by Eskom. It has not occurred. Now, you can ask what are the reasons for that and why there are these policy incoordination and policy misalignments. These are all issues that impact on the functioning of Eskom. I think it was Mrs. Maute who raised the issue of the audit and the consequence management. Again, I just want to respond by saying that there is consequence management, there are disciplinary inquiries, and there are disciplinary consequences as a result of this. But the specific issues that she wanted to talk about was this irregularities that have been occurring in our audit. We have now appointed a new audit company, and I'll come to that because I think it has also been asked by Honorable Chabalala. I have made it very clear that there are things that we have not been doing very well at Eskom, and I've tasked the Chief Finance Officer and his team to clear up our house and our own household such that next year, I don't want to find in an audit report that there are issues that we could have done that we have not done. I've seen this and it's unacceptable. I apologize to this committee, but that's the decision as a board we have taken, that we must do and keep our house clean and in order. And the new auditors that are going to audit us must be made aware that all of these issues needs to be cleaned straightforwardly. The other issue that I think André and his team have been dealing with is unbundling of Eskom into the 3 units. This unbundling, we have been doing it in collaboration and under the guidance of the minister. And so far, the unbundling of Eskom is on track. As far as we can see, we are ready to set up, I think, an independent transmission company out of Eskom at the end of this year. All of us, I think, working in coordination. And I want to repeat again, load reduction or load shedding, as they call it, is not impossible, I think, to deal with. We just need the coherent and the coordination of all the role players that govern Eskom to work together, and we deal with this matter. It's not an impossible task, but that's what we need. Should we have Eskom audited by the Auditor General? As far as I know, the late Auditor General and the current Auditor General obviously guide the process of auditing Eskom in the last 2 years that I've been chair. And I'm not aware that there is a move, I think, to make that auditing a public rather than private. But I know that even the private auditing firm work under the guidance of the Auditor General as such. I hope I've touched on most of the things that I have been asked to do. Unless there is something that is burning that I need to ask, let me just ask some members or the people that I've tried to respond to say whether I've satisfactorily answered them or not, so that I can be released from this meeting. Is there anything that...
No, thanks, Professor. We are not going to be able to do that, unfortunately, because we still have people whose hands are up there to also raise questions. We just accommodated you because you respectively attended this session while you splitted your time to accommodate us, of which we appreciate that. Therefore, we will release you kindly and appreciate that you did attend our session. That means a lot to us. Therefore, we will continue with those that will leave behind, whom your team will continue engaging with them. Yes, if there is any question that is not properly answered, they will have to answer that particular question. Thank you so much. You are released. Honorable members, can we continue? Thank you. Can we continue with Honorable Clark?
Thank you, Chairperson. Several of my questions have now been asked and answered by the Chairman of the Board. I would like to ask the following. In the report, Eskom reports on its losses in the presentation of the report. Can I please just get clarification if these losses include the amounts of fraud and corruption and state capture? And when will the committee receive a report in terms of the disciplinary actions that have been taken around these matters? Then how will Eskom improve in terms of its rolling blackouts? And I know the CEO does not like us to call it rolling blackouts, but I'm sure that's what it really is. There's very short-term communication that comes through. How will that be improved? Can the CEO also confirm that there has been no sabotage in terms of our plants, because there are speculations around that? And then also, Member Katalia did ask who are the municipalities that are not conforming to the load shedding schedules, but I'd also like to just extend in terms of that. I know, that municipalities do at times work with Eskom in terms of load shedding, because many of these municipalities have very aging infrastructure. So what we experience is that Eskom do their load shedding, and then immediately after that, municipalities are not able to get their power supply back onto the grid, and that people suffer, instead of 3 hours or 2 hours load shedding, another 5-6 hours extended to that. And that really already, load shedding has such a huge impact on the economy. And of course, that further impacts business when they are having to sit without power for an extended 5 to 8 hours, very often due to the municipality's aging infrastructure. And is there any synergy between Eskom and the municipalities to ensure that that does not happen? The professor did answer the question around procurement, and so I won't ask that question. Then in terms of municipal debt, is there any assistance and synergy in terms of the Minister of COCTA working with Eskom to ensure that these municipalities actually adhere to what's outstanding to Eskom in terms of their debt? Then in terms of the NERSA rejection of the multi-year tariff increase, what kind of impact will that have on Eskom? Because, we are seeing massive increases as it is on the consumer, almost unaffordable to many, many people. And, will there be another request in terms of government bailouts? Because that is a double whammy on the public purse in terms of increases of tariffs, as well as government bailouts. Also, the investigation in terms of Unit 4 at Medupi, can we please be informed when this will be concluded and when will this report serve to the committee? Can you also tell me what were the reasons of the resignations of the board members and what is the process to replace them? How will Eskom deal with its environmental woes? I just wanted to get clarity on that. Has Eskom been charged with fines in terms of not complying environmentally? And if so, what do those fines amount to? The minister spoke about work ethics and consequence management, corruption and fraud. Which is a huge factor in terms of Eskom. When we did the oversight at Eskom, we were informed by Eskom that all their contractors, their subcontractors are in fact screened to ensure that they are able to exercise their capabilities in terms of the projects they get. When I was listening to the presentation today, it certainly doesn't seem that that is happening. Can we please just get some kind of clarity in terms of that? Also, spoke about vandalism. That's a great problem. And can I just also be informed whether this is on Eskom sites, and what security precautions do we have, and what do those security precautions cost us on an annual basis? Then also in the presentation, they spoke about production bonuses that are going to be paid to certain staff members. What would the criteria be for those production bonuses? Then, I would really like the CEO to give us some feedback in terms of his press conference today and why we now resorted back to load shedding 2 as of from 2 o'clock today. And then also, there has been some articles in the media of recent saying that Eskom was going to do a skilled search in terms of engineers to assist the organization. And what is the status quo of that? And then, we have been told about the audit outcome opinion, which is irregular, which is a large proportion of irregular expenditure and the consequences that are going to be put in place. But I would really like to see a quarterly report from Eskom to see how effective their consequence management is versus the irregular expenditure. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Clark. Honorable Piri.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning to colleagues and everybody in the platform. As deliberately so, Chair, today, because load shedding is a national question. Yeah, the likes of Honorable Nkwankwas are here, and they managed to take the first fight. But nevertheless, one might also have one question or two. Chair, I wanna get a clarity in terms of the NERSA rejection to Eskom in terms of their fifth multi-year price determination application for the 3 financial year from 2022 to 2023 to 24 and 25 in the financial year. So my question is that what is Eskom's response to this decision by NERSA, and what will be the implication on the Eskom finances, not forgetting or given the financial constraints that Eskom is facing as an entity, and it's how will it affect its target performance going forward? And also, Chair, I want to join my colleagues into questioning about the load shedding. One will want to understand this load shedding, as all of us, we are aware that Eskom is supplying other countries, the likes of Botswana and Zimbabwe. How does it affect, or how does it impact with those other African countries that Eskom is supplying with energy, or the same as it's happening in the country? So I want us, unfortunately, the board chair is no longer with us, but I think we were supposed to be told how are they handling it versus us in the country, South Africans, and how does it affect the other countries that we are supplying, or is it only affecting South Africans? So in terms of that, my last question will be, I want to understand the consequence management that will be put by Eskom in terms of the municipalities that are not adhering to the load shedding plant schedule. What is it that they're gonna do to enforce the load shedding? As much as all of us as South Africans, we want electricity, then if we've got a challenge and we planned for a load shedding, they choose not to abide by the planned load shedding for our best interest. Those will be my 3 questions, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Piri. Honorable Komani, do we have Honorable Komani among us? Honorable Komani is not there. Honorable Malinga.
Thank you, Chairperson. Greetings to yourself, members of the Portfolio Committee, Minister, and the department, if they are present, Eskom, the board, and everybody who's on the platform, including the committee staff. Chairperson, let me thank this opportunity for me to just speak on this issue. Chairperson, most of the colleagues have already covered me. But Chair, I have questions that are troubling me. One, I think it's Honorable Shabalala and Mkhwanazi who have already spoken on the trending news of the stage 2 load shedding. Chairperson, it seems as if Eskom does not have a plan. I am really worried, Chair, especially in terms of their maintenance plan. My first question, Chair, will be, does Eskom have a maintenance plan, a sustainable maintenance? I know, Chairperson, good sometimes things break down, you need to do an emergency repairs and all that. But also what was trending on the news is that two mines at Kusile and Medupi have leaks. I don't know whether this load shedding that is now going to be at 2 o'clock is because of that. And it's sad, Chair, when somebody is on national TV and being asked about this thing, does not even know who are the people who are doing maintenance there. We'll just say our senior engineers, how many they don't know. And this will bring us to the irregular expenditures and wasteful expenditures that Eskom is facing. How do you monitor people that you don't know how many people that are there? Are they the relevant people to be doing or dealing with the leaks, Chairperson? Chair, there's another issue that I think is the CEO of Eskom that is also trending on the news. The request from DMRE of additional 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts to be connected to the grid. Aniko sure, Chair. I'm not really sure. They can't manage what we have now. With whatever that is being done in the power stations, in everything, how are they going to manage extra 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts? Does it make sense? Because everything just breaks down, Chair. I also want to touch on the issue, Chair. I know I might be out of order, Chair. We haven't had as a committee that the artisan housing, that white elephant that we went to see, whereby the expenditure has gone up to $1 billion, where it's only that we heard that there are executives that were fired. Was there money recouped from the executive that sanctioned those housing, Chairperson, that housing in what's the place that we went to? That place where there are flats that were built for artisans. Was there money recouped from the executives that approved this project, Chair? Also, Chairperson, there was an issue that there was an engagement between the Department of Human Settlements and Eskom to take over this flats. How is that going, Chairperson? Let me stop there, Chair. But yellow trading, seriously, it makes us to look bad as the portfolio committee, as if now we're not doing our work. If we can get what really is the challenge, because something is breaking down. Do we have an old fleet? What is happening? Maybe if we by khulume njengesizulu or ngesixhosa, Chair, so that we can understand what is the problem with Eskom. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Malinga. We've got the last person left now, who is Honorable Dlamini. Honorable Dlamini.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm here, young and alive. Thanks, Chair. Greetings, comrades and colleagues. I think for me, I only have one issue, which is I feel is the issue issue we should be discussing really. This of load shedding. You see, in our situation where we want to create jobs and the basis of investors investing in our country would be our ability to provide stable power supply, which we are not doing now. With increasing unemployment, we have a bigger problem that's growing as we are trying to deal with the problem. It doesn't inspire confidence if you listen to the CEO of this entity saying it's a dead horse or a broken down car, yet you still have a driver what is he writing, what is he driving, it doesn't give us hope going forward. Now, in our situation, we are going to have a very peculiar situation in the near future, in that most people would most probably want to venture outside of the grid. And those people would be more on the upper middle class, the people who generally afford to do things. And will be left with the poor people who are already not affording to pay for electricity as it is. So we are on a kayak going steady towards impophoma yini konje ngesilungu. But yeah, we are going towards a steep fall at the end of along the road. Now, what we need to be able to do, maybe we should be discussing how are we going to turn things around. You see, the people we represent out there, common people like my mom, who would say we did not have load shedding in the past, in the 2 years before 2019. What happened? Why are we having load shedding now? We will explain the aging infrastructure and whatnot, but we cannot afford to keep talking about aging infrastructure. What are we doing about aging infrastructure versus maintenance? Because a layman like me would think maintenance is about seeing that this bearing is old now, it's not working optimally, you replace it. For you to replace it, to shut this one down while these ones are operating, you replace this one, plug it on. Maybe we need to also look into the people who are supplying coal, because I've noticed the price of coal has increased. Coal is doing well in the market right now, and we have a lot of it, but we still have load shedding. Is there a correlation? If there is, what's the correlation? Is this a problem that can't be solved? If it can't be solved, what are we going to do? Because we can't keep lamenting no aging infrastructure, but we still have load shedding. Already we've communicated there's going to be stage 2 load shedding again. So we need to be solutions orientated. Now we know all the problems. There are no new problems. We are being told about staff members doing this. That's an HR issue. I don't think HR issues should be part of our discussion. Someone responsible for human resource should be able to deal with those. It can't be an issue that must be elevated to our level. We don't want to get involved in administrative issues. If there's an employee who does things in the other way that's outside of what is expected, there must be police, there must be procedures at Eskom that will deal with employee behavior and whatnot. That should have been dealt with at that level. In fact, we should at least be told, we had a problem with this employee and these are the measures we've taken. Let us not be bombarded by problems with no solutions. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Dlamini. Yes, I think the executive, the minister, are ready to respond to the question. But I just want also to indicate it's a pity that the chair of the board has left, but there was a concern on the 23rd, 24th of June, when the portfolio committee embarked on this oversight visit to Medupi and Gusile, that none of the members of the board came or accompanied us or briefed us or whatever. There were just none of them present. I think the members raised, though there was, of course, an apology that there is a session that was taking place somewhere, but I think members raised their concern about the failure even to send one person to be with the members or to just welcome the members when they visited those, because it was not a short notice kind of a visit. We prepared that in time and sent everybody, all the correspondence to Eskom in time. That's the point that I wanted to raise. Secondly, there is some mischief within the load shedding process that has been taking place in some areas, particularly here in Cape Town, where load shedding is more concentrated in poor communities, in working class communities, so to speak. And I really, because it was raised as a concern, and I had to embark on a process of proving that is possible. There's fact on that. There was I even had to forward some of the consent to the CEO because I happened to have his WhatsApp number, where there was a complaint that in most areas, especially in the poor townships, load shedding will extend beyond 2 hours to 3 to 4 hours, to others even 6 hours, people living with no electricity. While you go to Camps Bay, you visit people in Pinelands, in all these affluent areas, people, they don't have load shedding. I happen to have relatives that stays in these affluent areas who didn't get load shedding at the beginning of load shedding. It's only when it comes now that they started to experience a similar situation. I also extended that complaint to the CEO so that he could make a follow-up and investigate if there is that kind of mischief. And if there is, people have to be dealt with. Secondly, my last point, which I'm covered by members, but I think the issue of the fire that came in, I think, in Medupi, and it damaged some of the units there. It's a common knowledge. Most of the people heard about it. It was in social media, it was everywhere. But our concern is the investigation that take too long to get those individuals. People will be perhaps tolerant of the load shedding if they would know that culprits that are reversing the gains we are having at Eskom are dealt with. We know for a fact that there might be mischievous people in Eskom who are remnants of the previous corrupt individuals that has been dealt with. There might be the beneficiaries of those people somewhere. And those individuals might commit those mischievous kind of backlash or kind of retaliation, or whatever their attitude is. But the reality of the situation, if Eskom, in investigating such things, they take quick, fast, and dealt with those individuals, and consequent management take its course, it will be much more making people easy, and people will still have confidence that will, at some point, win this war. I will give you the minister first, and then we give the executive to respond to other questions. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I think the last comments that you've made is a good starting point. Why is that each time we think we're reaching stability within the system, that we have tweets coming from certain quarters, and no sooner the tweets come than one or other part of the plant experiences some kind of disruption. Unfortunately, there hasn't been the kind of attention required in order to figure out what's really going on. But I think your message is a message that needs to go to all of the Eskom staff on the one hand, but also a message to those who still feel aggrieved because they had to leave the opportunities for all sorts of mischievous stuff at Eskom, and want to now retaliate in one form or another, or whose egos wouldn't allow them to accept that it's time for them to move on and leave the job to somebody else to do. And I think that we will see a significant shift if we see some of those changes, together with what the chair and I also referred to as the culture issues within Eskom and its 40-odd thousand staff as well. So I'll go through some of the questions that I think I can help with. The first is the more general point that many colleagues have made, which is how long will this load shedding go on? And I think the CEO will add more information, but the bottom line, honorable members, is that until we can put on a few more thousand megawatts onto the system, and Honorable Malinga, notwithstanding the fact that there are the problems now, remember those problems, as the chair has just explained, are not just internal, they're also externally inspired. The opportunity will be created to do the kind of maintenance that is required to be done, provided, as many of you have mentioned, that the contractors are held to account and that they deliver what they are required to deliver in terms of the quality of work and outcomes that is required as well, because all of these factors, as you correctly point out, and which I accept on an unreserved basis because I share your view, is causing an immense amount of frustration amongst our people, whether they are residents, whether they're in working class areas or middle class areas, and whether they're large or small businesses as well. And what we require in government, which is something that we're trying to work on, is an integrated response to this crisis. One which ensures that each role player, in terms of the legislation that informs their work, does what is necessary and does it timeously and does it with the necessary sense of urgency in order to ensure that the work that needs to be done to stabilize Eskom can in fact take place. The second point, Chair, is that Eskom is going through and will go through for some years to come now, because there are several colleagues who asked the question, when are we going to have a stable Eskom? In fact, we're going to have a fair amount of managed instability, or rather than instability being misinterpreted, managed change over a period of time, because currently we've got to repair what we have to repair. Secondly, we've got to complete the restructuring or unbundling process. And thirdly, we've also got to introduce the changes that are required in terms of the just energy transition, starting at the Komati plant. And as we go beyond that and implement the nationally determined contribution that South Africa put on the table at COP26, that will also have implications both in respect of pollutants that I think Honorable Clark referred to, but carbon emissions more generally as well. So our aim certainly must be that load shedding must end sooner rather than later. It will end when all of these things are done properly, but in particular, if we have extra megawatts on the system. And thirdly, you can get extra megawatts by doing maintenance better, but also doing the operations, which is the point you're making, Chairperson. But doing the operations that is required to be done by managers at different levels, within a power station and within Megawatt Park itself, if everybody does their bit of work with the necessary discipline, without outside noise influencing them in any kind of way, and if they understand that they are managing a public entity that belongs to the people of South Africa, and the outcomes of which, i.e. megawatts, is something that the people require, and as Comrade and Honorable Dlamini pointed out, what the country requires in order to both get internal and external investments, then we will have the right kind of outcomes. But if the culture is one where everybody wants to take shortcuts, or a significant majority wants to do that, and there are indications that that is still the case, and to Honorable Kwankwa, let me say, culture change is easy to talk about, but difficult to get going. And therefore, all of your voices need to be added to our voices as well, regardless of the party political background we come from, to tell the people at Eskom, you work for us as South Africa. And it's important that you become honest workers, because you get paid more than adequately, and stop any nefarious activity that you might be involved in, because that nefarious activity is causing huge damage both to Eskom's reputation, but more generally causing damage, as several of you have pointed out, to the country as a whole. Nonetheless, we hear what the committee is saying in relation to, let's call it a plan, not only for maintenance purposes, but a plan beyond today. And there will be, there is some work going on in that particular regard, as some of you have requested, excuse me, and the outcomes of which is under discussion, and hopefully sooner rather than later, some announcements will be made in that regard as well. There are members of the board who are on the Zoom call chair. I can see Dr. Crompton for a start, and they might assist you where the chair was required to do so in your view. As far as Honorable Kachalia is concerned, there's a lot of detail he's asking for, and to the best of their ability, Eskom colleagues will respond to that, save where there is commercially sensitive information. But even there, I think I would insist on there being absolute transparency so that the facts are known by whomsoever is actually interested. As far as the audit opinion is concerned, there seem to be two legs to it. One is the going status concern, which is understandable because of the debt burden that Eskom is carrying. But as we go through the restructuring process, some elements of financial restructuring will happen as well, without compromising the lenders to Eskom, and in consultation with them. So that process will take on a greater deal of urgency and sharpness, because we have a clearer destination, so to speak, that's before us at this particular point in time. As far as irregular expenditure is concerned, there are two issues. The first is the historical irregular expenditure. And here we've been trying to persuade the Auditor General and the Accountant General in the Treasury that the irregular expenditure, for example, the corruption that took place at Medupi and the documentation that's related to that, must be ring-fenced in some way so that it doesn't carry over from year to year. All of you and the public will know that within this ring-fenced amount is so many billion rands of irregular expenditure. Where it's justifiable, the Treasury will give you the condonation required, and where documents and so on need to be tracked down post facto, everybody in Eskom, similarly in other SOEs, will do everything possible to track down the documentation, because as you know, as part of the nefarious activities of the past, documentation might not be available as well. So on the question of irregular expenditure, we still are of the view that the state capture part of irregular expenditure is not dealt with properly. It can be dealt with in a more elegant way if we have them in two different pockets, so to speak, both of which are transparent, both of which require the necessary attention from the financial people, and both of which need to be accounted for and dealt with in different ways at different stages, depending on the processes that we actually agreed upon. As far as the Auditor General doing the audits, generally that's the direction that we had agreed with the late Mr. Makwetu, and Ms. Maluleke understands that as well. So as the Auditor General develops the capacity, the Auditor General will take over the audits as it is doing in the instance of some of the smaller SOEs. And the point is validly made that we might get better outcomes. And what is to noteworthy here, which some honorable members haven't picked up on, is that the private sector audit companies that audited Eskom and other SOEs during the state capture period never exposed the corruption that went on. And there must be some process by which these companies that collected massive fees at the time, and on average that would be more than 100 million rands of fees a year over that period of time, must account for the fact that they didn't disclose or look for the corrupt transactions that actually took place at the time as well. So those are all matters related to the audit opinion that Ms. Motwe raised as some of her concerns. On the question of contractors and so on, the CEO and his colleagues will actually deal with that. There is a difference between a blackout and load shedding. Even I had to be educated on that. So you've seen blackouts in Texas, you've seen blackouts in California, you've seen blackouts in other parts of the world where the grid collapses. So as a result of high demand at the one end of the grid, but inadequate supply of electricity into the grid collapses, and that is the blackout. And to get that restarted is quite an exercise. And there are processes that Eskom has in place in the event that we go there. Load shedding, as I understand it, is to avoid getting to the point where blackouts occur, i.e. where the grid collapses. It is to prevent the grid from collapsing. And it is necessary to do so to reduce demand at the one end, because production is reduced as a result of faults at one or other unit as well. So we might like to colloquially call it rolling blackouts or rolling whatever it is, but that doesn't help people to understand the difference, nor does it inform people about a simple technical matter, which the public should be aware of so that it can actually understand just as much as all of us attempt to understand what is really going on at that particular point in time. The question was asked by Honorable Gumede about decarbonization and the status of labor. So this is what the just energy transition is about, Chairperson. It is about saying that whilst recognizing that over the next few decades, the world will go through a very significant change in the energy terrain, and therefore in the electricity terrain as well, and the way electricity is produced, the way it is utilized, and the extent of carbon emissions that take place as a result of all of these processes and other processes in society. So those shifts are going to happen. And the younger colleagues amongst us will be living through that experience of either temperatures increasing. Some estimates say that COP26, in terms of what it had before them as nationally determined contributions, will still leave the globe increasing in temperature by somewhere between 2.4 and 2.7 degrees above pre-industrialized levels. Of course, there's geopolitical issues here, but the critical issue for South Africa is that as government, we've decided this is our nationally determined contribution. This is the decarbonization processes that we will initiate within the country. Electricity contributes 41% of carbon emissions in South Africa, and we can have a special presentation to the committee by our Eskom colleagues in that particular regard. And what is required now is for Eskom's plan, which was given a lot of positive recognition at COP26, and that is why it was able to attract some capital, not adequately, but some capital for the pilot project at Komati to actually be initiated in a way in which workers are protected, workers are retrained, and workers, the newer generation of workers, are trained in the new technologies that are going to be utilized in the production of electricity. Similarly, the impact on communities, whether their community is near the coal mines or their community is near the power stations, an understanding has to be had of the impact on those communities, and they must not be left worse off or marginalized in the process of undertaking a just energy transition. So at some stage, Chair, we can go through those details with you, and within a year, we're going to learn a lot of lessons about what practically, what does it mean to implement a just energy transition. Then, Honorable Kwankwa's point, I think the CEO will respond to, or his colleagues, on the question of reducing debt. A significant reduction in debt did take place, as the numbers indicated, utilizing the opportunities that a strong rand and other factors helped with. If such an opportunity arises again, I'm sure colleagues at Eskom will utilize those opportunities as well. The point about municipal debt and how we deal with municipal debt is a matter that has been preoccupying our minds for some time, but also it's an issue that we've discussed in an integrated way as government in a committee chaired by the Deputy President. Some municipalities are quite willing to have Eskom come in to assist them technically, and there are a few agreements in that regard. There are a few municipalities that have subscribed to the partnership model, which we've talked about before. You might have forgotten, so let the CEO remind you about that. And the partnership model basically says, we'll come and run your electricity system for you, upgrade it for you, collect the revenue, make sure you get some slice of the revenue until the situation in your municipality has stabilized. And yet in other instances, after years of court actions and such negotiations, municipalities like Malutia Pufong have refused to be part. We took, in this case, the horse right to the river with plenty full of water, but the horse wouldn't drink the water. And we got to ask the question, why? Whose interests are being affected as a result of this kind of approach that we're actually taking. On the transmission network, the CEO will point out to you that there's a fair amount of investment that needs to occur to the tune of above 100 billion rands over the next 10 years or so, so that renewable projects and other projects that are established in other parts of the country, particularly the Northern Cape, have an easier connecting point to the grid itself. On the distribution side, there are some colleagues who made the point about municipal infrastructure, and this is where municipal budgeting and IDPs are of consequence, that there must be sufficient investment that actually takes place in the refurbishment of municipal infrastructure so that the municipality can run its show well, but it can also distribute electricity and articulate it in an appropriate way to all of the stakeholders and ensure that there's no breakdowns in that particular regard. On the question of a division to look at renewables, that is a matter that is being looked at, and when we make the announcement I referred to earlier on, some of these things will become clearer, so we don't want to go into the details right now. But there is some advanced thinking in that particular regard. And then Honorable Shabalala makes the point about Soweto debt. As the CEO will tell you that with the former mayor, the late Honorable Makubo, there were good discussions that were taking place. And once the issue of mayor and mayoral committee are settled next Monday, as required by legislation, we will then ensure that Eskom continues those discussions. It's not going to be a panacea because there are many assets that have to be paid for and which City Power will have to run. And it'll have to work out what it can afford to do and what it can't afford to do. It's reassuring to hear that we are of the view, and we should express that a bit more loudly, that the culture of payment is something that we need to encourage, and that not everything can be free in South Africa. Because we can't actually afford it at this point in time, or perhaps even in the future. But there are communities in different parts of the country that engage in illegal connections, in overburdening transformers and many subs, in sabotaging some of that equipment, in bypassing meters, and so on. So it's quite, we can get you photographs, but I'm sure many colleagues are aware of attempts to bypass the regulatory obligations that utilizers of energy actually have in this particular regard. And this is a kind of issue that the CEO and his team actually have to deal with as we go forward. In relation to some of the points that Honorable Clark has made, where information is required, I'm sure we will supply that information. The implications of the NERSA application, the CFO will address that question. And on the question of the board, people resign sometimes without giving reasons, or in some instances, we're told informally that there are other businesses that they are now involved in that they need to move on to and give attention to. So there's been several instances like that. And on the replacement question, that's a matter that I know it's taken a very long time, so let me admit that up front. But we're looking for the right kind of balance that would ensure that Eskom would have the right governance, but also the right skills at a board level to guide it through that process that I just described earlier on. Honorable Piri also has asked questions about NERSA, which the CFO will address, and municipality is not following load shedding schedules. We've heard about those instances. The CEO will address that. And Honorable Dlamini is absolutely right that if we don't get the electricity situation right and get it right quicker and with a far greater sense of urgency and in an integrated way, whatever the policy brief of different people is, with the sole intention of making sure that the country's reputation is retained, that electricity does not become a constraint on economic growth, then all sorts of new possibilities can be explored in order to achieve that particular objective. And an integrated approach will be crucial in that regard as well. And finally, your point, Chair, about mischief. There certainly seems to be some indication that there might be mischief around, but I think I don't want to dilute the strength of what you've put forward to the committee, which was more than adequate. So let me round up by saying that, yes, we have serious issues on the electricity front. Secondly, that we would be, I noticed that Mr. Kachalia wants to intervene, Chair, which I think is rather impolite. I've been asked to answer questions. I will do so. And I must be given adequate time, as much as he's had the time to list all his questions as well. And that's the purpose of this transparent exercise. Constraining me is not going to help him in any kind of way. So let me conclude by saying that there is hope ahead of us, but it's going to still be a longish journey, which we're going to make as short as possible with the different interventions that hopefully we can make sooner rather than later. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Minister. Can we have the CEO?
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Thank you, Honourable Members. Thank you for all the questions that were asked by Honourable Members. I shall try and cover as many of the areas as I can where some of my colleagues may have better information closer to hand. With your permission, Chair, I would like to defer to them. And I'll also try and avoid any repetition of the comprehensive overview that the Minister has already provided in the interests of the committee's time. As far as the comment by Honourable Makhonazi is concerned with regard to irregular expenditure, I think it's important to note that irregular expenditure is inflated and has been inflated by bringing to light irregular expenditure incurred in previous years. So, for example, in the 2021 financial year, where there was irregular expenditure reported, new irregular expenditure reported of 2.158 billion, 1.251 billion related to prior year irregular expenditure, and in particular, a contract that was concluded with a fuel oil supplier that is currently the subject of litigation in an attempt to recover that irregular expenditure. So, Chair, the challenge that we've got is that in the process of cleaning up, the irregular expenditure is inflated by prior year disclosures that we bring to the attention of the board as we continue with turning around the business. A number of members have commented on stage 2 load shedding. This is, of course, very regrettable. And again, from an Eskom perspective, we would like to apologize for having to implement stage 2 load shedding. Load shedding is a deliberate intervention by the system operator to curtail demand in an equitable and rotational basis in order to ensure that we can avoid a total system blackout. A total system blackout, for which we do have contingency plans in place, in the highly unlikely event that that were to occur, would require between 6 and 14 days to restore electricity countrywide. And this obviously is something that we want to avoid at all costs. And in order to do so, when generation capacity is constrained because of trips, failures, then we are forced, in accordance with long-established practice and in accordance with the grid code, to implement load shedding precisely to prevent the far more negative outcome of a blackout. So the terminology may strike people as pure semantics. It is not. It is two very different phenomena that we talk about. We have tried to improve our communication with regard to load shedding. This is obviously something that we do proactively. We are trying to give as much advance warning as possible. The nature of breakdowns, however, is that they tend to be unreliable and they tend to be unpredictable. So it is difficult to forecast a precise time and date long in advance when there will be load shedding. We are trying to be as transparent and as open as possible in an endeavor to ensure that the South African public is fully informed in order to enable them to make alternative plans. We understand, however, that this is a very inconvenient and very disrupting issue, and we are fully cognizant of the negative impact that it has, not only on our economy, but also on the daily lives, in particular, of the matriculants that are currently writing their exams. The solution, as the Minister has said, is to accelerate the immediate procurement of additional capacity to the tune of between 4,000 and 6,000 megawatts. The committee members are no doubt aware of the fact that Eskom is unable to buy electricity of its own accord. We are the single buyer of electricity, but the procurement process is driven by the IPP office, which reports to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. And the IPP office drives a competitive bidding process in terms of bid windows. Those bid windows are then awarded, negotiated by the IPP office, and are then presented to Eskom for approval and acceptance by our board, obviously having regard to the fiduciary duty of board members to protect the interests of the entity. So the Eskom position at the moment is that we are very grateful that the IPP office has recently identified the preferred bidders for bid window 5, and that will bring an estimated 2,600 megawatts onto the grid. It is clear from that number that this will be insufficient to address the total electricity shortfall, and we therefore are of the view that still more capacity is required. And we anticipate that the recent announcement by the President of the lifting of the licensing restriction from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatt will enable more capacity to be brought to the grid sooner rather than later, and we are investigating options to accelerate grid access in that regard. The Medupi 4 explosion, very regrettable incident, obviously, and the investigation is still continuing. We have had the first preliminary report by our own internal technical forensic team. This was completed about 2 weeks ago. We are in the process now of working through the findings of that report. And once that is done, we will be able to share the results of that with the committee and with the public as well, having regard to the fact that this was a very significant incident that played a major role in the current load shedding that we are experiencing, with a loss of generation capacity to the tune of some 720 megawatts, which will take between 18 and 24 months to recover. Therefore, this is clearly a matter of national interest, and we need to identify if there was any negligence or malicious intent, and if there was, then we need to bring those individuals to book for the actions or inactions. The Honourable Kachalia has raised a list of questions. He was gracious enough to furnish us with these questions. We will provide detailed answers to those questions, again, in order to provide full transparency. I may just give a high-level number in order to give a context to diesel consumption so far. By the end of September 21 of this financial year, we had already consumed for our open cycle gas turbines at Ruyter and Onkerlig some 2.5 billion rands, which is significantly higher than our budget. And that is obviously a consequence of the lack of reliability of our coal-fired system. So the coal-fired system really is not delivering the megawatts that we require, and we are having to top it up with very expensive diesel generations. Again, we can give the Honourable Kachalia full detail on the cost of the new build, the breakdown, exactly what that entails. We may just give an idea of the type of interventions that we have achieved after correcting those design defects. By April 2020, the monthly EAF at Medupi was sitting at 46%, which is, of course, far too low. After implementing these design defects, we were able to improve that to above 70% by July of this year. We have seen some weaknesses as a result of operational challenges that we have. But all in all, it is clear that we have addressed the bulk of the design challenges at Medupi, and that plant is now in a position to deliver far closer to its design specifications. The cost of implementing those design corrections came at 330 million rand per unit. So times that by 6 units, and then we have to do similar design corrections at Kusile, where that process has in fact commenced. So there is still a way for us to go in order for us to address those design defects. The Honourable Mahotwe, I think, raised questions about the going concern. If I may request our CFO, Mr. Caleb Casson, to just give brief comments on the going concern status of Eskom and steps that are being taken to address that. Caleb, please.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. Undergoing concern, firstly, be focusing on our own costs. Secondly, I think it's linked to the question in terms of the regulator, which I'll answer later. But more importantly, the government support that I alluded to, that's still also earmarked for the next 2 financial years. We work within all those cost and funding requirements to ensure that Eskom remains a going concern, which is presented to the board at the 6-month review as well as annually to ensure we are a going concern. And we really appreciate the support that we do get from government and National Treasury. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Caleb, perhaps you could address the question on not the statement by the auditors that our financial statements did not comply to standards. Maybe just please address that one too.
Thanks, André. Yeah, on that one, I think it was specifically referring to one around the irregular expenditure and a disclosure note in terms of completeness. And as Minister has also indicated, a lot of it relates to legacy contracts. And you indicated, André, that come through. And the second one was in particular to the inventory balances, which we indicated that at the time of meeting the submission date, we did send a cover letter to NT to say we are still busy with the auditors with regard to generation inventory. And like I've indicated, we've now put in processes to make sure there's no repeat around the inventory counts, so we can meet 31st of May 2022 submission to NT next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. With regard to our plan to exit load shedding, as we have indicated that in spite of our attempts to carry out reliability maintenance on our plant, the chairman spoke at length on that, and the risk of load shedding is going to be diminished over time as we carry out that reliability maintenance program, but it will not be eliminated. And that risk will only be eliminated by the addition of further capacity to the grid, and that's the 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts that I have referred to earlier. This is therefore the reason why for the past 2 years we have repeatedly put it out there in the public domain and also in our engagements with government that the process of bringing on this additional capacity to the grid should be pursued as a matter of urgency, and we are therefore pleased to see the progress going forward. The Honourable Gumede, yes, I think the loss of 18.9 billion is to a very substantial part attributable to a 6.7% reduction in revenue during the year under review, bearing in mind that we have now moved on about 8 months after that. The loss in volume, the loss in sales, was due to the fact that we saw a significant decrease in electricity consumption during the initial phases of lockdown during the previous calendar year. And we have seen a return to normal consumption patterns during the current financial year. And without wanting to give a forward-looking statement, I think it's fair to say that our numbers should look better for the current financial year once we release those results. The half-year results, just as an aside, should be ready for release before the end of this calendar year. Work by contractors remains a challenge, Chair. Part of the challenge that we have with ensuring quality work by contractors is that the work that needs to be carried out requires a high level of skill. If a contractor does not have an adequate pipeline of work for his staff, then that staff will very often be retrenched or let go. And it is therefore very difficult for such a contractor to attract the necessary skills to the business. We therefore find that the current avoidance of long-term strategic contracts to be concluded with original equipment manufacturers in accordance with PFMA regulations makes it difficult for the contractors to build up that skills base and to retain the skills base. So that is one of the consequences of the current procurement environment in which we find ourselves. With regard to municipal debt, as the Minister said, municipal debt remains a very substantial headache for us. We are currently sitting with overdue municipal debt to the tune of some 41 billion rand. This is significantly more than what we are owed by businesses of all of our other customers, except municipalities and Soweto. The overdue debt is less than 1%, 0.7% as a matter of fact. Our key industrial customers, the payment rate is 100%. So there are not any key industrial customers that do not pay their bills. And the reason for that, Honourable Chair, is very simply that if they don't pay their bills, we can cut them off. Because of court action, we are interdicted from pursuing that same approach with municipalities. So therefore, the consequences for non-payment for a municipality is very different to a key industrial customer. So the sanction of severing the connection is unfortunately not available for us. If I can then move on to the Honourable Kwankwa's question, and I really appreciate the focus that the Honourable Member has put on people and culture. When an organisation needs to be turned around, it is important to focus not only on the hardware, but also on the software. And there has been a very concerted effort to improve our communication internally, to look at staff morale, motivation, so that we can engage our employees on a continuous basis, keep them informed, not only via face-to-face town hall meetings, but also through newsletters and regular communications on a number of issues. And I think that the culture surveys that we do from time to time have borne out that there is a change, a positive change in the attitude of Eskom employees. Of course, there are 42,000 employees. Some of them have possibly got loyalties that lie with other previous incumbents, and that therefore may complicate matters. We are driving KPIs on localization and industrialization very hard. Eskom is probably one of the largest buyers of goods and services in South Africa. We procure about 141 billion rand in goods and services, including coal, every year. And we therefore can play a major role in driving demand for locally manufactured goods. And in conjunction with the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, we continue to implement government policy in that regard. And it is also part of our shareholder compact that we have with the Department of Public Enterprises. As far as new connections are concerned, we obviously want our customers to pay, and where we roll out new connections, we do have prepaid meters that we implement. There is also the free basic electricity program that is funded by the government by means of subsidies to the municipalities, and that provides for an amount of 50 kilowatt hours per month to indigent users. So those users have to register with the municipality in order to qualify, and that relieves some of the burden both on electricity cost to those indigent users, but also secures our payment in a positive way, while enabling Eskom to also play its role in providing electricity to hitherto unserviced areas. We are in a process of increasing the conversion of prepaid meters. We have about 180,000 households in Soweto that we still need to convert to prepaid meters. Every household has a meter, so it's just not a prepaid meter. So it's not as though there is an absence of control. It is just that the revenue certainty with a prepaid meter is obviously higher than with a postpaid meter. So that is one of the key steps that we've got. We currently have about 30,000 prepaid meters that we are rolling out, and there's a significant opportunity for us to procure more in order to ensure our revenue security. The Honourable Chabalala asked the EAF, why is it falling? And it's really a question of the fact that with the exclusion of Medupi and Kusile, and I've elaborated on some of the design challenges that we have with those two plants, the balance of our coal fleet is now more than 41 years old. And the plant has not been maintained adequately. In a number of instances, midlife refurbishments were not done. And that has resulted in a plant that is unpredictable and unreliable. And as we take more units out for maintenance, the way that the EAF is calculated is that planned maintenance is also deducted from the overall availability to arrive at the EAF. And that puts you in a position where the more maintenance you do, the lower the EAF becomes. Having said that, the performance of the coal fleet has been disappointing. We have seen a number of units where we have significant challenges, particularly with our so-called balance of plant. And these relate mainly to cooling towers. Some of those cooling towers have not been maintained for decades. And in the same way that a geyser will eventually scale up if hard water is used, those cooling towers, if not maintained adequately, will clog up and they will become less efficient. And particularly during summer, when ambient temperatures are high, the cooling of steam is therefore significantly prejudiced, and that then leads us to a position where the output from our fleet is reduced because of vacuum losses. We can only schedule the maintenance of these cooling towers when there is a general outage. We can't do them while the plant is online, so we have to schedule and coincide the maintenance of these cooling towers in line with our maintenance program, and therefore there's a period of about 3 to 4 years during which we will catch up on the maintenance of these cooling towers. We don't anticipate that there will be an increase in cost because of transfer pricing agreements between the divisions. The tariff is regulated by NOSA, so we can't increase our transfer pricing and in so doing raise the cost of electricity. That is a regulated element. Of course, in certain instances, municipal markups on electricity tariffs are very high, and that leads to a cost of electricity that is substantially, in some cases, as much as 161% higher than the cost of Eskom electricity. So there is a potential area that NOSA can also consider. The Auditor General is responsible for the Eskom audit and does so in partnership with private entities. So that is the current way forward. In future, the AG may take over the audit in total, but at this point in time, the AG is a participant and I must say a close participant in the process together with the private sector audit. On Soweto debt and the handover or the sale of Soweto and Sandton to the City of Johannesburg, we've made very good progress in discussions with the City of Johannesburg. Obviously, in this interregnum that we find ourselves in right now, we have some challenges with stability also due to the very unfortunate and tragic passing of two subsequent mayors, and we again express our condolences to their next of kin for this loss. We have a good opportunity here to align the political accountability with operational accountability, and there's a very keen willingness. The MOU that was referred to has now been signed by both sides, and what now needs to happen is for the City of Joburg to appoint an advisor to assist it in the structuring of this transaction. It is potentially a large and complex transaction. A due diligence will no doubt be performed by the City of Johannesburg on Eskom's relevant assets and financial statements, and that process needs to be completed before that transfer can take place. With regard to ongoing corruption, there is definitely still ongoing corruption. We are uncovering more and more. We are trying to implement control measures to stop opportunities for corruption. If I can give an example, the barcoding of spares in our warehouses is something that has not been implemented in Eskom. This is a huge omission because barcoding is a fundamental control tool that will allow us to maintain far tighter control. And we have admittedly been very slow in implementing that solution. So we are putting pressure on the system to accelerate the implementation of that, which should give us far better control and avoid the type of write-offs that the CFO referred to when we gave his presentation. We have capacitated our forensic investigation team, and that team is now very active in investigating allegations. It does have a significant backlog of cases, and it will therefore take some time to catch up. Bearing in mind also that by its very nature, corrupt acts are done with subterfuge, and it's not out in the open. So these are not difficult, these are not easy to investigate and solve. The Honourable Clerk asked questions about disciplinary action. Eskom is taking disciplinary action against all people who are accused of malfeasance and corruption. There's a disciplinary process that is followed. Typically, the person who's accused is suspended, and then as quickly as we can schedule a hearing, a disciplinary hearing takes place, and then depending on the outcome of that hearing process in accordance with labor law, we then have the option to dismiss that person, and that has happened in a number of instances. The consequences of state capture are very much alive. The notion that state capture ended when the private jet of a certain family left Lanseria Airport, I think is not founded. It does continue, and we are still sitting with the ramifications of that. We are of the view that there are still networks in place that were established during the time of state capture. They are still active, and they are definitely not in place with a view to have the best interests of Eskom at heart. The Minister referred to the role that Eskom is playing with regard to assisting those municipalities who are willing to enter into so-called active partnering agreements to allow Eskom to come and help them. Msunduzi municipality is one such example where at a high voltage level, Eskom is assisting. Unfortunately, at a low voltage level, the municipality still wishes to retain full control, so we cannot intervene there. In the case of Maluti Apufong, that municipality has declined all attempts to assist it, not least attributable to the fact that they owe Eskom some 6.1 billion rand, and we may all speculate as to the reasons why that debt has been allowed to build up to that extent. We have requested through the political task team chaired by the Deputy President assistance from COGTA, but there are a number of constitutional reasons why national government cannot interfere in the sphere of local government, and therefore there are some legal challenges with giving directives and taking over, although in some instances, in Fuleni municipality, for example, administrators have been appointed to assist an ailing municipality. Tariff increases are definitely required in order for us to reach cost reflectivity. We have engaged with NERSA on a number of occasions to implement the multi-year pricing, price determination methodology. That has not always been the case, and regrettably, we have had to engage in court action where we have prevailed. The origin of the very large Eskom debt can, of course, find its way back to the construction of Medupi and Kusile, where at the time the shareholder declined to inject upfront equity to fund the construction of Medupi, Kusile, and Ingula. And because of the fact that Eskom then had to borrow money on the market to fund these projects without being able to recover the cost of these borrowings through a cost-reflective tariff, Eskom had no alternative but to build up its debt to its current unsustainably high level because of the fact that NERSA did not allow for tariff increases, as was the assumption when equity support was declined at the inception of these projects. We have significantly stepped up our security precautions at our plants. We have put in place drones equipped with infrared cameras that patrol the perimeters of our plant at night. We have had a number of successes where we were able to apprehend cable thieves caught in the act. We can also track suspicious vehicles that are in places where they shouldn't be. In our plants, we are rolling out the installation of intelligent cameras. These cameras are equipped with artificial intelligence to observe where there's untoward activity. For example, in the past, we have had incidents where water valves were opened, draining a boiler of demineralized water, which then takes a significant amount of time for that boiler to be filled again. Demineralized water is not water you can just get from the tap. You have to put it through a water treatment plant. We anticipate that the installation of these cameras will assist in preventing some of these mischievous acts that we have seen. As far as the production bonus is concerned, the production bonus is confined to people involved in actual production. So executives do not qualify for the production bonus. It's not paid out to executives. And it is linked to very strict stretch performance targets. The way that the scheme has been designed is that it is self-funding. So if money is paid out, then it will be less than the overall value delivered by the colleagues that qualify for that bonus. As far as the Eskom response to NERSA is concerned, the announcement by NERSA that it is rejecting Eskom's multi-year price determination methodology application and the request by NERSA to Eskom to submit a new application based on an as yet to be determined new methodology puts not only Eskom but also municipalities in a very difficult situation, because in the absence of a proper approved regulated tariff, Eskom and the municipalities would not be in a position to apply a lawfully determined tariff. And that has therefore led to Eskom again engaging in legal action against NERSA, because we would not be in a position to levy any tariffs if we don't have a legal basis on which we were able to do so. As far as foreign markets are concerned, Eskom is a participant in the South African power pool. We are not only a seller of electricity, we're also a buyer of electricity, in particular from Kohora Bassa. And we therefore have to be very careful how we manage those contractual relationships. If we unilaterally impose or curtail supply to those markets, the same may be applied to us. And from a balancing perspective, the risk to Eskom of non-compliance is far greater. We do, however, strictly apply the consumption limits so that there is no excess electricity supplied above what is available. We have had extensive engagements with municipalities on adherence to the load shedding schedule. And I think we can say with confidence that that the air has been cleared. We now are in a position where the Munichs will stick to the schedule. They will abide by their obligations, and we really want to thank them for their cooperation in this regard. Responding to the Honourable Malinga, yes, the maintenance plan is being carried out, but bear in mind, again, the age of the fleet. We can choose to spend more and more and more on maintenance. There is a curve in maintenance engineering called the bathtub curve, and as you reach the end of plant life, you have to spend exponentially more on maintenance just in order to keep your aging plant alive. And due to the fact that our plants have been run very hard, a substantial proportion of our units are now in this phase where they require very expensive and very substantial maintenance interventions. And this has put us in a position where, again, we need to accelerate the addition of new capacity to the grid, which of course our restructuring effort will assist. We don't believe that adding new capacity will exacerbate the problems. One of the reasons is that the private sector, by and large, will be responsible for operating this new capacity. So our current resources will not be stretched with the addition of new capacity as where we are at the moment. As far as the Wilge flats are concerned, this has been also a key issue that a number of members have inquired about. Another regrettable example of the corruption that characterized the construction of the Kusile power station. There was negligence on the part of the former general manager for facilities for the project that started in 2012 to build these residential flats. Disciplinary action was taken. The employee was dismissed after a hearing process, and we have recovered. We've instructed attorneys to recover the losses from the employee. Honourable members, stating the very obvious, Eskom does not have powers of arrest, and we are therefore in the hands of law enforcement and criminal justice authorities to pursue those people who are guilty of criminal acts. We can only pursue civil matters as an entity. I think, Honourable Chair, that I will not again repeat what the Minister has said in response to your remarks, with your permission. So if I may pause here and hand back to you. Thank you for the opportunity to engage with the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, CEO. Honorable members, I think now we have exhausted our questions due to the time constraint that we have to be in the House. Those who are based in Cape Town, in an hour from now, and some will have to log in at 2 from 2 o'clock. I will check to the members if there is any agent follow-up to 2 or 3 people before I hand over, so that we can be in a position to complete our meeting. Is there anybody who wants to make a sharp? I'm seeing Shabalala. Is there anyone else? Because I won't be able to give another one after those that have note. I need only not more than 2, 3 names. Okay. It means all others are covered. Honorable Shabalala, come in. Shabalala.
Yes, Chair, let me thank the presentation. I hope I'm audible. Chair, I would have raised a matter with the CEO without really deliberating it, but I would have thought that the least he would have done, he would have at least responded to what I would have raised with him. And I think he is aware what I'm speaking about. So I would really appreciate if I can hear his comments around that, with due respect. Thank you.
Okay, CEO.
Chair, if the question by the honourable member relates to the so-called dead horse, maybe this is a colloquial expression.
Yes, that's the one we just.
The colloquial expression is that you should not flog a dead horse because it will not move. And also, when you have a dead horse, changing jockeys or appointing a committee to investigate the dead horse is not the way to go. If there was any discomfort caused by the use of this colloquialism, then I'm terribly sorry for that, and I withdraw that remark.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you covered, Honorable Shabalala. Honorable members, let me take this opportunity to thank the Minister for the time he has taken from the beginning of this meeting, answering and responding to all the tricky, difficult questions we have raised. And of course, the chairperson of the board, in his absence, he has also took his time despite being double booked for today, but she made the point that he prioritized our session, and we are grateful of that. And we would like also to thank you, the CEO and the CFO, and your entire team of Eskom. Yeah, we are in a very difficult situation. We are really, of course, this meeting took place after a serious occurrences that took place, and that frustrated not only us. You must understand that we are in the forefront. We got all these complaints as a committee. Sometimes people will put pressure on us to respond on technical issues or perhaps more of managerial kind of issues. We will always try to explain to them that, look, this is for Eskom. Even today, I was bombarded with a lot of newsroom wanted to ask us some question, but I said we need this meeting first so that Eskom can be in a position to take us on board with confidence and clarify and explain to us. We have to bombard them with questions. It's only after we have received those questions that we'll be able to pronounce ourselves on certain matters. I hope the management, the executive in this instance, the board, including the ministry, understand this kind of pressure we are in. We understand also they are under pressure, but we are also under pressure. We are all frontline workers in this particular electricity problem in our country. Therefore, the sooner we are in a position to deal with these issues, we know they are complex, but I think society expects us to deal and take this behind our back. We came from that oversight in June very much motivated when we heard that Medupi is almost finished and all units have been done. What was left was what is called commissioning. And also got another positive report about Kusile. We came back as a committee a bit positive. And it was really frustrating to start seeing on social media fires that purported to be taking place in these plants, in this power station. That was really a serious frustration to us. We hope that the issues that we raised here will be resolved. My last point before we close, CEO and your team, around this problem of the Auditor General. I think it's not helping for Eskom to consistently denying or rejecting some of the issues raised by Auditor General, differing with their opinion and all that. It's not helping us. It's not helping even the society to understand what is happening. But rather, I will suggest that a process of taking each other into confidence, so that we are both Eskom and Auditor General in the same wavelength in relation to this problem. If the Auditor General is claiming that there is no consequence management, sit before it comes to us at this level, because when the outcomes are coming to the public, they will reflect as if the new CEO is not doing any improvement. But I think if you sit down with the Auditor General, because at the end of the day, the Auditor General had a final word in terms of determining whether there is qualified or unqualified audit outcomes. Therefore, it will be very important if both groups sit down and try to resolve these matters. I know maybe they might not seem, I'm not an accountant, they might not seem, they might not seem easy as I'm saying, but I think there is some kind of an engagement that need to put each other in the same wavelength in terms of understanding, so that even if Auditor General is saying this still didn't happen, but there is some kind of a motivation that it's not happening because because of ABC. You know, it must not be just a question of qualified with no explanation as to what created that, so that the society can understand that we are still held up by the legacy of state capture. If that is the case, it must be something clear to everybody. With all those words, we wish you, Mr. André, Ruyter, luck to resolve these issues. And we know that you are under pressure, your CEO, all eyes are on you. And I don't wish to be you either in these circumstances, but I think we have to resolve these issues. You are supposed to be fit to confront them. With those words, thank you very much. I know the minister is also have to go and confront Parliament with some other questions, which might also be not far away from the questions that we are asking here. He's also under fire. Therefore, we wish him well and a good luck to deal with those issues. Thank you very much. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you to everybody. Thank you, members of Parliament, for the good question you have asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Recording stopped.